In the dim glow of the Coruscant Opera House, Chancellor Palpatine leans toward Anakin Skywalker. Did you ever hear the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise? The question cuts through the music, heavy with something more than curiosity. Palpatine speaks of a Sith Lord so powerful, he could use the Force to influence life itself. So wise, he could even keep the ones he cared about from dying. The only thing he feared was losing his power. In the stillness of the night, his apprentice betrayed him, killed him. Anakin listens, unaware that this is not a legend, but a truth whispered by the very one who made it so. And the name hangs in the air like a shadow. Before he was known to the galaxy as Darth Plagueis the Wise, he was born Hego Damask, a Moon from the world of Magito. The Moons were tall, thin, long-headed beings known for their calculating intelligence and their skill in the affairs of finance. Magito itself was a world of icy winds and glittering crystal cities, a place where wealth was measured not just in credits but in influence. And influence was the lifeblood of the Damask family. The Damasks were powerful bankers tied to the intergalactic banking clan, one of the most important economic forces in the galaxy. Hego grew up in an environment where power was not only desired, it was expected. But his hunger reached far beyond wealth. From an early age, Hego was different from the other Moons. Where they sought to control markets, he sought to control life itself. It was whispered that he had an unusual sensitivity to the Force, something rare for his species. That sensitivity drew the attention of a figure who would change his life forever, a Sith Lord known as Darth Tenebrous. Tenebrous was a Bith, a species better known for their musical genius than their connection to the Force. But this Bith was unlike any other. Tall, cunning, and ruthless, Tenebrous embodied the cold precision of the Sith. He was a master of the rule of two, and he had chosen Hego Damask to be his apprentice. It was Tenebrous who gave him the name Darth Plagueis. The name was more than a title, it was a prophecy of the kind of Sith he would become. Under Tenebrous's training, Plagueis learned to look beyond the crude understanding of the Force. Most Sith sought power through domination, through the breaking of their enemies. Plagueis sought power over life itself. He studied the Force at the level of its smallest components, the midi-chlorians, microscopic life forms that lived in the cells of every living thing. The Jedi revered midi-chlorians as the conduit through which the Force spoke to the living. Plagueis saw them as tools to be manipulated. If they could be influenced, life could be extended. Death could be postponed or even reversed. This was the kind of power the Sith had never fully grasped before. But for all his studies, Tenebrous kept him on a tight leash. The rule of two demanded that the master always be cautious, never allowing the apprentice to grow powerful enough to strike too soon. And yet in the mind of every apprentice, the same thought takes root. One day, I will surpass you. Plagueis accompanied Tenebrous on missions across the galaxy, missions that blurred the line between commerce and Sith manipulation. Through the banking clan, they funded wars, collapsed economies, and pulled the strings of entire star systems. Each move brought the galaxy one step closer to chaos, and chaos was the forge of the Sith. The Tenebrous had his own vision, one that Plagueis found increasingly flawed. The Master was obsessed with grand engineering projects, with bending galactic history through carefully calculated events. Plagueis saw a flaw in this approach. To him, the ultimate control lay not in economies or politics, but in the biological essence of the Force. He experimented in secret, conducting quiet studies on the nature of life. Some say he began with simple organisms, altering their growth and lifespan through subtle manipulations of the Force. Others whisper that he experimented on sentience, testing how far life could be stretched or restored. What is certain is that his fascination with immortality was already deepening. Tenebrous knew of his apprentice's obsession, but underestimated how far it would drive him. The day came when Tenebrous and Plagueis were working together on a project far from the core worlds. They traveled to a remote planet to secure a new form of technology that would aid their designs. But Plagueis had already made his decision. As Tenebrous labored, Plagueis struck. In that moment, the long-planned betrayal unfolded exactly as the Sith code predicted. There is no mercy in the rule of two. The strong take the place of the weak. Tenebrous fell beneath the power of the apprentice he had trained. And with his master's death, Plagueis became the Sith Master. He stood over Tenebros's lifeless body, already considering how this death might serve his experiments. It is said that Plagueis even attempted to use the Force to manipulate the midi-chlorians in Tenebros's body in that final moment, to see if life could be forced back into the corpse. If he succeeded even briefly, no record remains, but the act itself reveals the depth of his obsession. For Plagueis, the death of his master was not only an act of ascension, it was a chance to test the very boundaries of the Force. Now free from Tenebros's oversight, he could pursue his research without restraint. He returned to Magito and used his position in the banking clan to create vast networks of influence. Political leaders, corporate heads and underworld figures all fell into his quiet web of control. In the shadows, he began experiments that the Jedi would consider unthinkable. Worlds were visited under the guise of commerce, but in truth they became laboratories for his theories. He watched populations, studied birth rates, observed illnesses and their cures, all while manipulating outcomes through the Force. Each experiment was a step toward his ultimate goal, to master the Force, so completely that death itself would kneel before him. Yet, in the tradition of the Sith, he knew that he must one day take an apprentice of his own. And somewhere in the galaxy, a young man named Sheev Palpatine was already beginning his rise. On the distant world of Naboo, in the bright capital city of Thad, a young man was beginning to emerge as a figure of unusual promise. His name was Sheev Palpatine. Born into a wealthy family of political influence, Palpatine was intelligent, ambitious, and already accustomed to the subtle dance of power. But beneath his refined manners, there was something darker, something restless, something hungry. From an early age, Palpatine had shown an unusual connection to the Force. He did not yet understand it fully, but he knew it set him apart. And it was that difference, that spark, which drew the attention of Darth Plagueis. Plagueis had been watching Naboo for some time. The world was beautiful, yes, verdant fields, sparkling rivers, elegant cities, but beauty was not what interested him. He saw in Naboo a planet of political complexity, a place where rival factions struggled for dominance beneath a surface of civility. Such places were fertile ground for Sith influence. Through his vast network of informants and corporate agents, Plagueis heard whispers of a young man unlike the others, a man with intellect sharper than any of his peers, a man capable of hiding his true thoughts while presenting a flawless exterior. It was exactly the kind of mind the Sith could mold. Their meeting did not happen by accident. Plagueis, still known to the public as Hego Damask, arranged to cross paths with Palpatine under the guise of business. The first encounter took place on the polished steps of a Naboo government building, the sun catching on the Mayan's elongated features. Plagueis spoke in measured tones, offering compliments wrapped in subtle tests. Over the following weeks, their conversations deepened. Hego Damask presented himself as a mentor, a benefactor who could guide the young man's political career. Palpatine, flattered yet cautious, accepted his guidance. But beneath the polite exchanges, Plagueis was probing. He spoke of power, not in the crude sense of brute force, but in the art of shaping events so subtly that no one could trace them back to you. He spoke of patience, of moving the galaxy one step at a time toward your will. Palpatine listened, and in listening he began to understand. The turning point came one evening in the private gardens of Damask Holdings' Naboo estate. The night air was cool and the twin moons cast silver light over the neatly trimmed hedges. Plagueis dismissed the servants and spoke more openly than ever before. He revealed that he knew of Palpatine's latent connection to the Force. The young man tried to feign ignorance, but the moon's golden eyes seemed to pierce straight through him. Plagueis spoke of the Sith, not in the distorted myths the Jedi spread, but in their true philosophy. The galaxy, he said, was bound by the chains of the weak, and it was the destiny of the strong to break those chains. Palpatine asked what the Jedi would say to such an idea. Plagueis smiled thinly. The Jedi, he said, were blinded by their own hypocrisy. They claimed to serve peace, but in truth they served stagnation. Over time, these conversations became lessons. Plagueis did not simply lecture. He demonstrated. He arranged for certain political rivals of Palpatine's family to find themselves ruined, their reputations shattered by scandals that appeared entirely natural. Palpatine began to see the pattern. He began to understand that power was not taken in a single grand act. It was built, piece by piece, until the moment came when it could be claimed openly. One night, after a long walk through the estate's shadowed corridors, Plagueis brought Palpatine to a hidden chamber. Inside, the air was colder. Strange artifacts lined the walls, ancient Sith masks, small holocrons pulsing faintly with crimson light, fragments of long-forgotten weapons. Plagueis told him that what lay beyond the Jedi's teachings was far more powerful than anything he had yet imagined. He explained the rule of two: always a master, always an apprentice. The master's role was to guide, to shape, to pass on knowledge. The apprentice's role was to learn and one day to replace the master. Palpatine's eyes narrowed at that. He asked how a master could ever willingly accept such an end. Plagueis' expression remained unreadable. It was not about acceptance, he said. It was about inevitability. The Sith did not fear death, for death was merely the moment when the apprentice proved himself worthy. But he added, there were ways to delay that moment, ways to extend life far beyond the natural span. Palpatine asked if such things were truly possible. Plagueis leaned forward, the low light glinting off his eyes. I have studied life itself, he said. I have learned to influence the midi-chlorians to create and to preserve life, and perhaps one day to make death irrelevant. That was the moment the bond between them truly formed. Palpatine, already ambitious, now saw not just the promise of political power, but the possibility of eternal power. The offer was irresistible, and so Sheev Palpatine became the apprentice to Darth Plagueis. In secret, the two began their work together, Plagueis as the teacher, Palpatine as the eager student. They trained not in the temples or arenas of the Sith of old, but in the quiet corners of the galaxy, hidden from Jedi eyes. Their alliance would reshape the fate of the galaxy. And as with all Sith stories, it would end in betrayal. The apprenticeship of Sheev Palpatine began not with a grand declaration, but with a subtle shift in his reality. From the moment he swore himself to Darth Plagueis, every aspect of his life was now filtered through the lens of the Sith philosophy. There was no curriculum, no formal timetable. The training happened in moments, scattered through days and nights, woven into ordinary events so that nothing would seem unusual to prying eyes. Plagueis began with the mind. He told Palpatine that a Sith's greatest weapon was not the lightsaber. It was the mind's ability to perceive patterns invisible to others, to see events not as isolated incidents but as threads in a vast and interconnected web. The first lessons were in observation. At state dinners, Palpatine was instructed to notice who avoided whose gaze, who poured their drink with a trembling hand, who smiled too quickly after an insult. In the marketplaces of Naboo, he was told to watch how merchants lied without words, or how customers manipulated prices with silence. Every encounter became an opportunity to map the inner workings of others. Only after months of this did Plagueis turn to the Force itself. They trained in secret rooms, where durasteel walls muffled sound and shadows hid movement. Plagueis taught him how to quiet his mind until the galaxy's hum became a single clear note, how to reach out with his senses, feeling the life around him, the tiny heartbeat of an insect on the windowsill, the faint flicker of fear in a servant's mind 3 rooms away. At first, Palpatine struggled. His mind was restless, hungry for action. But Plagueis was patient. A Sith, he said, must be the master of patience, for the galaxy could not be bent in a day. When Palpatine's control had grown, the training grew darker. Plagueis showed him how to bend the will of others, planting ideas like seeds, letting them take root until the target believed they were his own thoughts. He demonstrated on political figures whose downfall would benefit their plans. Palpatine watched as seasoned senators suddenly championed causes they had once opposed, unaware that the change came from subtle Force suggestion. This was not the flashy domination of a weak mind. This was the slow corrosion of belief, so gradual that the victim would defend it as their own free will. The Sith also trained in deception. Plagueis insisted that his apprentice learn the art of dual lives, one as Sheev Palpatine, the promising Naboo politician, and one as Darth Sidious, hidden architect of the Sith grand plan. The two personas could never bleed into one another. In public, Palpatine spoke with courtesy, with moderation, with charm. In private, he let his true mind roam free, shaping schemes with cold precision. It was a delicate balance. Any slip could draw the attention of the Jedi, whose sense for disturbance in the Force was not to be underestimated. There were physical lessons as well. Plagueis was no duelist in the flamboyant sense, but he understood the necessity of combat. He trained Palpatine in the use of the lightsaber, not to fight fair duels, but to kill efficiently. Strikes aimed at vital points. Footwork that positioned him for the fastest kill. Every motion calculated, nothing wasted. Palpatine proved quick to learn, not because he sought the thrill of combat, but because he saw it as another tool to ensure his survival. The greatest secrets, however, were kept for their deepest hours together. It was then that Plagueis began to teach him the forbidden knowledge, the manipulation of midi-chlorians. These microscopic entities, Plagueis explained, were the link between the living force and the physical body. By influencing them, one could heal wounds that should have been fatal. One could prevent the onset of age. One could even create life. Palpatine listened, transfixed, as Plagueis spoke of experiments conducted in secret laboratories, hidden far from the Republic's eyes. Beings grown in tanks, their genetic patterns subtly altered by the will of the Force. Creatures that existed for a moment then dissolved into nothing, all in pursuit of perfect mastery over life and death. Not all of the training was academic. Plagueis required proof of progress. He sent Palpatine on assignments, some small, others far more dangerous. One involved swaying a mid-level bureaucrat to pass legislation that would redirect trade routes in a way favorable to Damask holdings. Another required arranging the discreet removal of a political rival on Coruscant. Each mission tested different skills: persuasion, intimidation, covert elimination. Palpatine learned quickly that the true measure of success was not simply completing the task, but ensuring no one suspected he was involved. Years passed in this way. Palpatine rose in Naboo's political ranks, each step carefully orchestrated with Plagueis' guidance. The public saw a charismatic young senator in waiting, a man devoted to the ideals of the Republic. Truly in shadowed rooms and whispered conversations did his true nature show. Plagueis watched with satisfaction as his apprentice's influence grew. But he also watched with caution. For every Sith master knew that an apprentice's ambition, once sharpened, could one day turn against him. And in the quiet corners of his mind, Sheev Palpatine had already begun to wonder, not if he would one day replace his master, but how soon. Sheev Palpatine's rise in the political sphere of Naboo was not a matter of mere chance. It was the result of careful planning, subtle manipulations, and the precise orchestration of events that Darth Plagueis had set into motion years before. From the moment he entered the political stage, every handshake, every speech, every seemingly spontaneous encounter was in fact the product of deliberate calculation. And in the background, the dark presence of Plagueis was always there, unseen but deeply felt, guiding every step. Palpatine began as a minor political aide, a role that allowed him to move quietly through the corridors of power without drawing too much attention. In those early days, his charm was his greatest weapon. He had the ability to make those around him feel heard, understood, even valued, while secretly cataloging their weaknesses and ambitions. He remembered who owed him favors. He remembered who spoke ill of him behind closed doors. And with each passing month he began weaving those threads into a web from which his rivals could not easily escape. Plagueis encouraged this approach. He told his apprentice that the key to controlling others was not to dominate them outright, but to make them believe they were acting in their own best interest. It was the same lesson the Sith had applied for centuries: rule through influence, not open force. Only when the moment was right, when the trap was fully closed, would the final strike be delivered. Palpatine's first true test came when a trade dispute erupted between Naboo and one of its neighboring systems. The conflict threatened to destabilize the planet's economy, and local officials scrambled to find a resolution. Plagueis saw an opportunity. He instructed Palpatine to position himself as the voice of reason, the figure who could broker peace without appearing to seek personal gain. Over weeks of negotiations, Palpatine subtly undermined the other negotiators while presenting himself as the only one capable of bridging the divide. By the end of the dispute, his name was on everyone's lips, not as a power-hungry politician, but as a skilled diplomat who put the people first. With that single victory, his reputation began to grow. More importantly, Plagueis saw that his apprentice had internalized the lesson. Power could be seized without anyone realizing it had been taken. As the years passed, Palpatine climbed steadily. He was elected to the Naboo Legislative Assembly, where he championed causes that appealed to the common citizen, while discreetly benefiting the interests of those he wished to bind to him. Behind closed doors, he cultivated relationships with wealthy backers, trade guilds, and sympathetic planetary governors. He learned to speak the language of influence, one that was not recorded in official transcripts, but in private agreements sealed with handshakes and quiet nods. The Republic itself was in a state of slow decay. Corruption was widespread, the Senate bloated with self-interest, and the outer rim worlds were increasingly restless under the weight of central authority. Plagueis and Palpatine studied these fractures, like engineers examining a structure for its weakest points. Each crack in the foundation was a potential lever. Each grievance could be fanned into a fire that served their larger design. Palpatine's next great leap forward came when Plagueis arranged for him to be introduced to influential figures on Coruscant. These meetings were never random. One dinner party with a prominent senator here, a quiet conversation with a judicial representative there. In each case, Palpatine left a lasting impression, polished, articulate, and most importantly, unthreatening. His ability to appear harmless was one of his greatest strengths. It allowed him to sit in the company of powerful individuals without them ever suspecting that he might one day eclipse them. Plagueis also began introducing his apprentice to the more shadowed side of galactic politics. Palpatine learned how money could flow unseen through shell companies and trade fronts. He learned how to manipulate votes in the Senate without ever setting foot inside the chamber, using intermediaries and subtle coercion. He even began to influence small policy changes on distant worlds, the ripples of which would not be noticed for years but would eventually contribute to the climate of instability they needed. During this period, Plagueis continued to train him in the Force. Political maneuvering and Sith mastery were not separate disciplines, they were one and the same. To sway a senator was to use the same principles as bending the will of a weak-minded guard. To anticipate a rival's next move was no different from sensing an opponent's strike in combat. By the time Palpatine secured a position as Naboo's representative in the Galactic Senate, he was no longer the eager student he had once been. He was a figure of growing influence, with allies in both legitimate and illegitimate circles, and though Plagueis still guided him, Palpatine had begun to envision his own role in the galaxy's future, a future in which the Republic, and perhaps even the Sith Order itself, would bend to his will. In public, he played the part of the idealistic senator, advocating for fairness and stability. In private, he whispered promises to corporate leaders, offered discreet favors to political allies, and subtly steered legislation to benefit the long game. Every move was calculated to expand his influence while concealing his true nature. And though the galaxy at large saw only the surface, an ambitious but harmless politician, Plagueis saw something else entirely. He saw the shadow of a Sith Lord who was beginning to believe that he no longer needed his master. The Sith had always been patient, their revenge against the Jedi, and the Republic was never meant to be swift. It was designed to be inevitable, and Darth Plagueis, perhaps more than any Sith before him, understood the necessity of moving slowly, carefully, and without revealing the true extent of his designs. The grand plan was not his idea alone. It was the culmination of centuries of Sith philosophy that began after the defeat of Darth Bane's predecessors, when Bane established the rule of two, one master, one apprentice. It was not only to prevent internal Sith betrayal from destroying the Order again. It was also to create a streamlined, unbroken chain of ambition, where knowledge and power would be passed down in a concentrated form, never diluted by too many rivals. Plagueis was the inheritor of that chain. And now, with Sidious, he intended to bring the chain to its ultimate, galaxy-shattering conclusion. The essence of the grand plan was simple in concept, but staggeringly complex in execution. First, destabilize the Republic from within, not with open attack, but with political corruption, economic imbalance, and the slow erosion of trust in its institutions. Second, position the Sith apprentice in a role of apparent legitimacy, where he could manipulate events without suspicion. Third, orchestrate a galaxy-wide crisis so catastrophic that the Republic would willingly grant extraordinary powers to the apprentice, believing it to be for their own salvation. And finally, when those powers were secured, strike at the Jedi with overwhelming force, eradicating them before they could react. Plagueis understood that the Jedi were not the kind of enemy that could be defeated purely through lightsaber duels and battlefield victories. The Jedi were an ideology as much as they were an order. To destroy them, you had to undermine the very faith the galaxy placed in them. You had to make their wisdom seem like weakness, their restraint seem like cowardice, and their devotion to peace seem like a dangerous naivety. Sidious, with his mastery of public perception and political maneuvering, was the perfect weapon for that task. Plagueis taught him to plant seeds of doubt in the minds of senators and citizens alike. Speech here, subtly questioning whether the Jedi were truly impartial, a private conversation there suggesting that the Jedi Council might be too rigid to adapt to the galaxy's changing needs. The message was never stated outright. It didn't need to be. By the time the thought reached its target, it had taken root as if it had been their own idea. But politics was only one part of the plan. Plagueis had a fascination with the very nature of life and death, believing that mastery over the Force could one day grant the Sith the ability to prevent death entirely. This obsession with immortality was not a mere vanity project. It was part of the grand plan's long-term vision. If the Sith could transcend mortality, then their rule could be eternal. The galaxy would no longer swing back and forth between light and dark. It would be locked in shadow forever. To pursue this, Plagueis devoted enormous resources to scientific research. He funded genetic experiments in secret laboratories on remote worlds. He worked with bioengineers and Force-sensitive adepts to test theories on midi-chlorians, the microscopic life forms that connected all living beings to the Force. He believed that by manipulating these organisms he could extend life, create life, and even bring the dead back from the void. Sidious observed this with a mix of fascination and calculation. He was intrigued by the possibilities, but he also saw the potential weakness it created in his master. Plagueis' focus on immortality sometimes diverted his attention from the political theater in Coruscant. And Sidious, ever the patient student, began quietly taking more initiative in those affairs. By now, the two Sith Lords were operating on parallel fronts. Plagueis continued to manipulate the economic engines of the galaxy, working through banking clans, trade federations, and mega-corporations to create dependencies and hidden debts. Meanwhile, Sidious cultivated relationships in the Senate, building a network of loyalists who could be called upon when the time came. Together, they were dismantling the Republic's stability one unseen cut at a time. One of the boldest moves in this period was the quiet cultivation of the Trade Federation as a future instrument of chaos. By leveraging financial manipulation and subtle intimidation, the Sith ensured that the Federation's leaders would be receptive to Sith influence. At the same time, Plagueis began probing into the separatist sentiment brewing on distant worlds that felt neglected or exploited by the central government. These planets, he knew, would one day become willing participants in a greater conflict. Plagueis' genius lay in understanding that war was not simply about two sides clashing. It was about shaping the conditions that made war inevitable. If you could control both sides of the conflict, if you could be the hand guiding the blade and the shield, then victory was absolute. Through it all, the apprentice learned. Sidious mastered the art of wearing masks, not literal ones, but masks of personality. He could be the warm, approachable senator in the morning, the cold strategist in the afternoon, and the shadowed Sith Lord by night. Each persona was equally convincing, because each served a specific purpose in the grand plan. The galaxy remained unaware of the growing storm. The Jedi continued their duties, trusting in the stability of the Republic. Senators argued in the halls of the Senate over tariffs and trade routes, unaware that their debates were being subtly steered toward collapse. Merchants, politicians, and planetary leaders all believed they were acting in their own best interests, never realizing that those interests had been carefully shaped by unseen hands. And in the shadows, Plagueis looked upon it all with satisfaction. The pieces were moving exactly as he had foreseen. The Jedi would be blindsided. The Republic would beg for a savior. And when that moment came, it would be his apprentice who would step forward, cloaked in legitimacy, to take control. But Plagueis, for all his foresight, could not yet see the one thing that would undo him. For in teaching Sidious the ways of power, he had also taught him the art of betrayal. And Sidious was already considering how the grand plan might unfold without a master to share it with. By this point, Emperor Palpatine had fully embraced his role as Darth Sidious, though the galaxy would never see him as such. In public, he remained the calm, intelligent, unassuming senator from Naboo. Every smile, every carefully chosen word, every gesture of civility was part of a performance so precise that even the most skeptical observer could find no flaw. Yet in the quiet corners of the galaxy, away from prying eyes, he was already moving pieces in ways that would determine the fates of millions. His apprenticeship under Darth Plagueis had taught him patience, subtlety, and the value of influence over brute force. But Sidious had begun to see opportunities that even his master had overlooked. Plagueis was focused on the long game, the manipulation of life itself, the ultimate control of death. Sidious understood that while immortality was a worthy pursuit, the more immediate path to power lay in bending political structures, igniting conflicts, and turning the Republic's own weaknesses against it. He began by observing the Senate with a meticulous eye, noting which senators were ambitious, which were naive, and which could be manipulated to serve his ends. Every vote, every debate, every seemingly mundane bill became a potential lever. Sidious learned to play the bureaucrats like instruments, coaxing them into decisions that would further destabilize the Republic while presenting him as a voice of reason and moderation. Through careful rhetoric, subtle persuasion, and the occasional whispered threat, he began to accumulate influence far beyond the public eye. Sidious's moves were not limited to words. He cultivated relationships with trade organizations and corporate conglomerates, quietly tying them into a network that would later serve as the backbone of the separatist movement. He encouraged resentment among Outer Rim planets, fanning grievances that made rebellion seem justified while remaining just distant enough to avoid suspicion. He identified potential leaders among the discontented and ensured they were positioned to rise at the opportune moment. All of these actions were done under the watchful guidance of Plagueis, who continued his experiments in the manipulation of life. Plagueis, ever meticulous, measured the progress of each project with scientific rigor, believing that the careful study of life and death would provide ultimate control. He shared knowledge with Sidious sparingly, teaching him not just political strategy, but also the delicate techniques required to influence the midi-chlorians. Together, master and apprentice were a dual force, one weaving the fabric of galactic power, the other exploring the mystical boundaries of existence itself. The first major step in Sidious's personal shadow campaign came with the brewing crisis on Naboo. The Trade Federation, increasingly restless and frustrated by economic disputes, was susceptible to subtle manipulation. Sidious encouraged their sense of grievance, whispering suggestions through intermediaries, carefully masking his influence. He did not command them outright, he allowed them to believe the initiative was their own. The seeds of the blockade, the economic disruption, and the political chaos that followed were planted quietly, almost imperceptibly but with precise timing. While the Federation prepared its moves, Sidious acted within the Senate. He positioned himself as a mediator, a calm and rational presence among growing panic and disagreement. He whispered reassurances to allies, sowed doubt among rivals, and ensured that he would be the one called upon to provide guidance when the crisis reached its apex. By the time the Senate recognized the gravity of the situation, Sidious had already placed himself at the center of the solution, the only figure whose counsel seemed both credible and impartial. This duality, shadow manipulator and public mediator, was Sidious's greatest strength. Few could perceive that the senator they trusted was the same being orchestrating the very turmoil he appeared to resolve. He moved like a shadow over Coruscant, unseen yet omnipresent. Every financial transaction, every political alignment, every whispered rumor was subtly redirected to benefit the emerging Sith plan. Sidious also began exploiting the weaknesses of the Jedi. He observed their movements, noted their interventions, and tested the limits of their perception. By carefully creating crises that appeared spontaneous, he forced the Jedi to act reactively, never proactively. He studied their decision-making, understanding their moral imperatives, their strict adherence to rules, and their inability to act without full knowledge. In this, he found both fascination and opportunity. For the Jedi, a group that prized foresight and justice would ultimately be blinded by their own limitations. Sidious also began cultivating apprentices for himself, even as he remained the apprentice of Plagueis. He understood the rule of two, yet he knew that grooming his own assets in secret would provide a contingency should the need arise. Some of these contacts were simple pawns, unaware of the full depth of their manipulation. Others were force-sensitive individuals, subtly tested and prepared to follow his commands when the time was right. Every move he made was calculated, measured, and designed to set up the larger play. He allowed the galaxy to believe that the Republic was merely ineffectual, that the Jedi were cautious but inflexible, and that the Trade Federation's grievances were understandable, yet manageable. All of these perceptions were precisely what he wanted them to believe. For when the crisis reached its climax, the public would seek a single savior, and that savior would be him. At the same time, Sidious continued his private studies under Plagueis. He observed the experiments with the midi-chlorians, the attempts to manipulate life and death, and learned the principles even if he did not yet seek to master them fully. His ambition was growing, and with each passing year, he began contemplating the inevitability of his own rise. The apprentice's mind, once guided with care, was now capable of imagining the galaxy remade under his control. The Senate, oblivious to the full scope of his influence, continued its routine, debates and disputes. The Trade Federation prepared its fleets in secret, and in the shadows Darth Sidious moved silently, pulling strings, setting traps, and ensuring that the galaxy would stumble exactly where he wanted it to. Even Plagueis, for all his foresight, could not fully predict the cunning of his apprentice. Sidious began acting with a subtle independence, suggesting moves, planting ideas, and shaping events in ways that sometimes went beyond the master's instructions. It was a delicate dance of trust and ambition, one where each step forward strengthened the web of deception that would eventually engulf the galaxy. In this period, Sidious learned the true meaning of patience, of subtlety, and of timing. He learned that power was not seized with a single stroke, but with countless small, invisible manipulations that built upon one another until nothing could stop the inevitable conclusion. And in these quiet years, as he prepared the galaxy for the upheaval that would culminate in the Naboo crisis, Sidious was already thinking beyond his master's plans, imagining the moment when he would claim the ultimate prize, total control. The crisis began not with violence but with a shadow moving through corridors of power, subtle and almost imperceptible. The Trade Federation, frustrated by disputes over taxation and trade routes, decided to blockade Naboo, cutting off the planet's access to the rest of the galaxy. For ordinary citizens, it seemed like a sudden, inexplicable act of aggression. But for Sidious, it was the first visible step in a plan that had been decades in the making. He observed from his seat in the Senate, outwardly calm, his expression a mask of concern and reason. Senators debated the proper response. The Security Council issued statements, and the Jedi Council quietly dispatched representatives to investigate. Sidious, however, was not merely observing, he was orchestrating. Through intermediaries, he ensured that certain senators would block immediate military intervention, arguing for negotiation and diplomacy over action. He whispered suggestions through loyal contacts, ensuring that the Trade Federation felt justified in their blockade, unaware that they were being guided by the hand of the very senator appearing to mediate the conflict. Meanwhile, Naboo itself was descending into panic. Citizens worried about supplies, commerce slowed, and the planet's political leaders struggled to maintain calm. Queen Padmé Amidala, young and determined, sought to assert her authority, summoning her advisors and attempting to negotiate directly with the Federation's leaders. Sidious observed her with interest, noting her idealism and her determination. He understood that the eventual fall of Naboo's government would serve his purposes perfectly if handled correctly. The Jedi were dispatched to the planet as mediators, led by Master Qui-Gon Jinn and his apprentice, Obi-Wan Kenobi. They arrived under the assumption that their presence could resolve the blockade peacefully. They did not yet understand that the conflict had been designed precisely to bypass their ability to intervene effectively. Each small obstacle, each delay in negotiation was part of Sidious's unseen hand guiding events toward a dramatic climax. On Naboo, the invasion escalated. Droid forces moved strategically, but not overwhelmingly, designed to appear threatening while still allowing the planet's defenders to respond. Sidious ensured that every communication, every report sent back to the Senate, painted a picture of reasonable justification for inaction. He cultivated fear and uncertainty, allowing the Jedi and Naboo leaders to act reactively rather than proactively. Queen Amidala, sensing the severity of the situation, decided to take matters into her own hands. She orchestrated a bold plan to escape the capital under blockade, intending to plead Naboo's case directly to the Senate. Her courage was genuine, but Sidious had already anticipated such a move. The escape provided an opportunity for the drama he required, a public crisis that would demand a mediator and elevate his perceived importance. Meanwhile, Sidious manipulated key individuals within the Senate to champion his proposals. He ensured that committees debated endlessly on procedural points, that the bureaucracy stalled, and that Naboo's plight became a question of procedure rather than immediate intervention. By the time Padmé arrived on Coruscant exhausted and frustrated, Sidious was positioned as the calm, rational authority capable of resolving the conflict. At the same time, he orchestrated smaller, subtler moves across the galaxy. He ensured that banking clans provided discreet financial support to the Trade Federation, strengthening their ability to maintain the blockade. He whispered guidance to diplomats, shaping negotiations so that they would fail at just the right moments, forcing Naboo's leaders into the very positions he had foreseen. Every seemingly chaotic element, the Federation's aggression, Naboo's desperation, the Jedi's cautious interventions, was aligned to make Sidious appear indispensable. Sidious' triumph was not simply in resolving the blockade, but in the perception he created. To the Senate, he appeared as a statesman above petty quarrels, capable of reason where others failed. To Naboo, he appeared as an ally, a figure of calm guidance in a sea of confusion. And to the Trade Federation, he was a subtle hand guiding them toward their own ambitions, never realizing they were serving the goals of the very person who now controlled the narrative. Within these events, the seeds of the Clone Wars were also quietly sown. Sidious began forming relationships with influential military figures, subtly suggesting reforms and strategies that would later become part of the larger conflict. He identified potential leaders among discontented planetary militias, ensuring they would rise at the right moment to serve as pawns when war eventually erupted. Even the Jedi's interventions were studied, catalogued, and analyzed, preparing Sidious to exploit their predictable adherence to morality in the future. In this way, the Naboo crisis became the first major public demonstration of Sidious's genius. He did not need armies, fleets, or overt displays of power. He needed patience, subtlety, and a precise understanding of human or sentient behavior. Every hesitation, every small misstep by others became an advantage to him. By the end of the crisis, Naboo was saved. The Trade Federation appeared to be negotiating in good faith, and the Senate regarded Sidious with admiration and trust. But behind this facade of calm resolution, Sidious's mind was already several moves ahead. He understood that this was merely the opening act, the first demonstration of how crises could be manipulated to position him for ultimate control. Plagueis, watching from the shadows, could sense the mastery of his apprentice, the subtle brilliance that even he had helped cultivate. Yet even the master could not fully anticipate the lengths to which Sidious would go, the cunning that would one day turn the grand plan into his personal empire. And so, as Naboo celebrated the peaceful resolution of its blockade, Sidious prepared the next phase. A chain of events that would eventually engulf the galaxy, test the Jedi to their limits, and establish the foundation for a Sith empire cloaked in the guise of democracy. Every alliance, every betrayal, every quiet manipulation was moving toward the inevitable conclusion. An upheaval so complete that no being, Jedi or politician, would fully comprehend the depth of his control until it was too late. In this moment, Sidious's shadow extended across the galaxy like a tide, imperceptible yet unstoppable. And in the quiet corners of his mind, he began to consider the ultimate question. How soon could the apprentice surpass the master and claim the galaxy entirely for himself? Following the Naboo crisis, Sidious recognized that the art of manipulation required more than a single triumph. It demanded a continuous, invisible hand, guiding the galaxy toward precisely calculated outcomes. He began cultivating an intricate network within the Galactic Senate, identifying allies, adversaries, and those who could be swayed with subtle persuasion. Every senator was observed, every public speech analyzed, and every personal inclination catalogued, creating a mental map that allowed Sidious to predict and influence decisions before they were even made. In parallel, he fostered relationships with economic and military institutions, ensuring that his influence extended beyond political discourse. The banking clans, already indebted and reliant on Naboo's recovery, became quiet partners in his designs, their resources flowing into projects designed to expand his unseen power. Trade federations, still smarting from the previous blockade, were guided into positions that would later serve as tools for the separatist movement. Sidious allowed them the illusion of autonomy, whispering suggestions that seemed like their own ideas while directing them toward his larger objectives. At the same time, he continued his subtle study of the Jedi, understanding that their moral rigidity and commitment to the light side of the Force could be exploited. He observed their interventions in galactic disputes, noting their predictable patterns of restraint and diplomacy. Each act of caution by the Jedi was stored in Sidious's mind as knowledge, each display of moral certainty catalogued as a weakness that could be leveraged when the time came. He recognized that the Jedi, powerful though they were in combat and foresight, could be manipulated through their own ethical convictions. The Sith Grand Plan, previously orchestrated by Plagueis, now began to evolve under Sidious's own initiative. While his master was still obsessed with the manipulation of life itself, Sidious shifted focus toward practical, immediate tools of power, politics, perception, and social influence. He realized that an empire could be created not solely through the mastery of the Force, but through the careful orchestration of fear, loyalty, and dependency. And it was within these layers of subtlety that the Republic's eventual downfall would take shape. In the months following Naboo, Sidious subtly destabilized alliances, sowed distrust between planetary systems, and encouraged subtle dissent among influential senators. He understood that a divided Senate would be easier to control, that a republic perceived as ineffective would seek a singular, strong authority. Every bill, every committee hearing, every vote became a tool in his larger game. Sidious learned to manipulate legislation quietly, introducing seemingly minor procedural delays, influencing voting blocks and arranging conflicts of interest that would appear coincidental but were in fact carefully engineered. Meanwhile, Sidious nurtured his public persona as the calm, rational, intelligent senator from Naboo. He became the voice of reason in debates, the mediator during disputes, and the advisor sought by both allies and rivals. To the galaxy, he appeared as a stabilizing force, a pillar of morality and diplomacy. In reality, every word, gesture, and decision was calculated to increase his influence and isolate potential threats before they could act. The Jedi remained unaware of the full extent of his activities, seeing only the face Sidious allowed them to see. They noted his competence and effectiveness, admired his diplomacy, and even trusted him in delicate matters. This trust would later be weaponized, turning their perception into one of their greatest vulnerabilities. Sidious also began laying the foundation for the separatist movement in earnest. He identified disenfranchised systems, exploited their frustrations with taxation, trade regulations, and perceived neglect by the central government. He arranged for sympathetic leaders to rise, subtly guiding their rhetoric and decisions while ensuring they felt independent of his influence. Ships were positioned, fleets provisioned, and secret communications established, all appearing natural, yet forming the infrastructure of a future rebellion. Simultaneously, he encouraged internal rivalries within the Republic. He whispered doubts, created suspicion, and ensured that factions within the Senate viewed one another as obstacles rather than partners. By amplifying minor grievances into significant conflicts, he weakened the Republic's ability to act decisively when future crises emerged. Through all of this, Sidious maintained contact with Plagueis, ostensibly as the obedient apprentice, yet increasingly acting with autonomy. Plagueis, absorbed in his own experiments and obsession with immortality, did not notice that Sidious was beginning to think independently, even contemplating the eventual moment when the apprentice would eclipse the master. Sidious had absorbed all the lessons his master could teach: patience, subtlety, political and force strategy, and the manipulation of life itself. But he had also cultivated his own vision, one where the galaxy would be remade entirely according to his design. He carefully observed the behavior of key senators and Jedi, studying their reactions, cataloging strengths and weaknesses, and predicting likely responses to future events. By understanding the patterns of thought, loyalty, and fear, Sidious was able to create situations in which outcomes could be precisely controlled without revealing his own influence. Every crisis, every negotiation, and every personal interaction became an experiment in influence and control. Sidious' reach extended to the financial sector as well. He manipulated credit, trade agreements, and interstellar commerce in subtle ways that destabilized planetary economies. Entire systems became reliant on external support, often from institutions secretly guided by his will. These economic dependencies, invisible to most, would later serve as levers to bend entire sectors of the galaxy to his control. All the while, he continued to cultivate his public image. To the citizenry, he was calm, rational, and devoted to the well-being of the Republic. To the Senate, he was persuasive, knowledgeable, and indispensable. To potential enemies, he remained a benign, almost invisible presence, a figure not to be feared, but respected. Yet every relationship, every gesture, every word spoken in public or private added to a lattice of influence so complex that the galaxy itself could not yet comprehend it. Even Plagueis, who had trained him in the deepest secrets of the Force and the manipulation of life, began to recognize the unique brilliance of his apprentice. Sidious had learned patience, subtlety, and strategy, yet he had also developed an instinct for timing and influence that surpassed even his master's expectations. In this period, the apprentice became more than a student. He became a shadowed architect of galactic destiny, preparing the stage for the eventual eruption of the separatist crisis, the Clone Wars, and the transformation of the Republic into the Empire. Sidious's mastery of political machinations was now absolute. Every senator, every planetary governor, and every trade guild functioned, often unknowingly within the framework he had built. The Republic, while appearing stable to outsiders, was in reality a fragile web of interdependencies, rivalries, and manipulated perceptions, all converging toward a single point of control: him. The Jedi, honorable yet blind to the subtleties of political corruption, continued to operate as though the galaxy was still governed by principle rather than deception. And in the quiet moments when the Senate chambers were empty and Coruscant's night fell like a velvet shroud over the city planet, Sidious would consider the inevitability of the next steps. He knew that the Naboo crisis had been merely the opening act, a demonstration of his ability to manipulate both perception and reality. What remained was to escalate these quiet manipulations into an unavoidable storm, one that would engulf the galaxy, test the Jedi, and place him in the position of ultimate authority. In the quiet, unseen corridors of power, Sidious began sowing the seeds of what would one day become the separatist movement. He understood that rebellion required more than dissatisfaction. It required organization, leadership, and the illusion of legitimacy. The systems he targeted were not random. They were carefully selected for their grievances, their isolation, and their vulnerability to manipulation. Planets neglected by the Republic, burdened by taxation, or frustrated with bureaucratic delays, became fertile ground for his subtle influence. Sidious began by identifying key leaders among these systems. Some were ambitious politicians seeking greater influence, others were industrial magnates frustrated with trade restrictions, and still others were military figures longing for autonomy. Each was approached indirectly, often through intermediaries, so that they would never suspect that the whispering guidance they received came from a Sith Lord cloaked in the guise of a benevolent senator. He suggested alliances, encouraged rivalries with neighboring systems, and planted rumors that fomented mistrust toward the Republic, all without ever appearing to intervene personally. The Trade Federation remained a cornerstone of his strategy. Sidious ensured that they had both the resources and the pretext to maintain their fleets and expand influence quietly. He advised them on negotiations, subtly prompting failures that would justify further militarization and assertiveness. Each failure of diplomacy was in reality a carefully crafted lesson in independence, teaching the Federation to act as though they were free agents while remaining under Sidious's unseen guidance. He also recruited other corporate entities, like the Intergalactic Banking Clan and the Commerce Guild, weaving them into a network that would provide financial and logistical support when the time came for open conflict. These organizations were largely motivated by profit and self-interest, making them predictable and reliable instruments of his plan. Sidious never needed to coerce them. He merely nudged them, adjusting incentives and manipulating circumstances so that their actions aligned with his long-term objectives. At the same time, Sidious fostered resentment among planetary populations. He allowed minor disputes over trade, taxes, and autonomy to fester, amplifying grievances until the populations themselves believed they were acting independently in pursuit of justice. These small sparks of dissent, dispersed across dozens of systems, formed a network of unrest that would later coalesce into a coordinated rebellion. Each act of defiance, no matter how insignificant it seemed at the time, was a thread in the web he was constructing, a web that would eventually ensnare the entire galaxy. The Jedi, still unaware of the depth of Sidious's influence, continued their roles as peacekeepers and advisors. They noted the growing unrest, sent envoys and attempted mediation, yet they were blind to the fact that the conflicts had been orchestrated precisely to challenge their principles. Their interventions, motivated by morality and fairness, often played directly into Sidious's hands, reinforcing their own limitations and making them appear ineffective to the very systems they sought to protect. Sidious's manipulation extended to the formation of councils and committees within the Republic. He influenced appointments to positions of authority, ensuring that those sympathetic to his ideas, or at least predictable in their behavior, occupied key seats. Through subtle advice, he shaped policy discussions, delayed critical reforms, and guided decision-making in ways that appeared organic but were, in fact, entirely orchestrated. By the time open hostilities began to appear on the horizon, Sidious had constructed a carefully layered framework. Discontented planets believed they were uniting of their own volition. Corporate entities acted as though they were pursuing self-interest. Even the Jedi, acting with honor and reason, inadvertently validated the narrative of a republic in decline. And at the center of it all, Sidious remained the calm, rational figure, guiding events subtly from behind the scenes, always invisible yet entirely in control. His genius lay in the orchestration of perception. To those involved in rebellion, the Sith hand was invisible, masked by layers of coincidence, political debate, and bureaucratic delay. To the Republic, the unrest appeared spontaneous, almost accidental, a natural consequence of mismanagement. To the Jedi, The crises seemed ethical dilemmas rather than the product of a master strategist working in the shadows. And to Sidious himself, each action was a piece in a grand chess game, played across decades, galaxies, and ideologies. This period also saw the secret cultivation of potential allies among Force-sensitive individuals. Sidious identified those with ambition or vulnerability, tested them through challenges, and subtly guided their development without revealing the full scope of his influence. Some were trained to become warriors, others diplomats, all capable of furthering the separatist cause when the time came. These apprentices, unwittingly loyal, were the seeds of power that would supplement the greater plan when open conflict erupted. Every diplomatic failure, every economic disruption, and every minor rebellion was part of an intricate pattern. Sidious allowed the Republic to flounder, let internal rivalries fester, and let fear grow, all while maintaining the appearance of stability and reason. He understood that true control required the illusion of choice. Systems needed to feel they were acting of their own volition, otherwise their eventual submission would be hollow, fragile, and less effective. As years passed, the galaxy moved ever closer to the point of no return. Small skirmishes, trade disputes, and localized conflicts became commonplace. The Jedi responded, sometimes successfully, sometimes not, unaware that their every action was feeding into a larger narrative designed by Sidious. By the time open rebellion appeared inevitable, the foundation had been laid so thoroughly that resistance seemed futile without the guidance of a singular, powerful leader. At the heart of it all, Sidious maintained his dual life. Publicly, he remained a statesman, the voice of reason, a senator who argued for measured responses and careful diplomacy. Privately, he was the architect of rebellion, the invisible hand orchestrating the destabilization of entire star systems. The elegance of his strategy lay in its invisibility. No outward signs of coercion, no obvious puppet strings, only the gentle nudges that cumulatively reshaped the galaxy. And in these years, as he prepared the galaxy for the inevitable clash between the Republic and the Separatists, Sidious's mind constantly considered the ultimate goal. He imagined the eventual downfall of the Jedi, the collapse of the Republic, and the ascendance of a new order under his control. Every whisper, every suggestion, every carefully cultivated alliance moved the galaxy toward that moment. And yet all of it was executed with a patience and subtlety so profound that no one, not even the Jedi Council, suspected the magnitude of his influence. The Separatist movement, though appearing spontaneous to the galaxy, was in reality the first tangible expression of Sidious's long-term strategy. It was the culmination of years of subtle manipulation, careful observation, and disciplined orchestration, designed to create conflict, dependency, and ultimately, the perfect conditions for the rise of the Sith. The stage was set, the pieces arranged, and the galaxy, still unaware, was moving toward a confrontation it could not yet understand. The galaxy did not awaken to war with a single trumpet or clarion call. Instead, it emerged gradually, like a slow tide rising beneath the unsuspecting shores of the Republic. For years, the systems Sidious had carefully cultivated began to stir with unrest. Trade disputes, taxation grievances, and political rivalries, each small and seemingly isolated, coalesced into a pattern that only the most observant could detect. And yet, the Jedi, preoccupied with maintaining balance, failed to perceive the invisible hand guiding these events. When the first clone troopers were deployed, it seemed a response to immediate threats, rather than part of a premeditated design. The Kaminoans, their creation of the army hidden behind layers of secrecy, were merely following the instructions of Sidious, delivered through intermediaries. The Republic, believing itself prepared to act in the galaxy's defense, unknowingly marched into a situation orchestrated to produce maximum dependence on centralized command. Countless planets became the stage for minor skirmishes, each one providing lessons in strategy, morale, and the weaknesses of both sides. The Jedi, spread thin across multiple theaters of conflict, struggled to maintain order, their every action catalogued and analyzed by Sidious for future manipulation. He observed the responses of generals, senators, and planetary leaders, understanding the psychology of war on both macro and micro scales. Every victory, every defeat, every retreat and ambush was recorded mentally, building a comprehensive understanding of galactic military behavior. Meanwhile, the separatist forces, composed of droids and mercenary armies, moved in concert with Sidious's plans. Leaders like Count Dooku, a former Jedi swayed by the lure of purpose and power, acted with authority, yet remained under the subtle guidance of Sidious. Dooku's charisma drew systems to the separatist cause, but his movements were carefully shaped to ensure the Republic would appear reactive, rather than proactive. In this way, Sidious maintained the illusion that conflict arose spontaneously from political discontent, when in truth it was a meticulously staged chess game on a galactic scale. The Jedi Council, sensing that war had erupted, dispatched teams of their own to mediate, negotiate, and when necessary, fight. Masters and knights alike were pulled into engagements across the galaxy, their powers and moral convictions tested repeatedly. Sidious observed each encounter, noting which Jedi were susceptible to deception, which relied on their emotions, and which maintained unshakable discipline. These observations informed the next phase of his plan, the eventual manipulation of the Jedi Order itself. As battles escalated, entire star systems became embroiled in conflict. Ships filled with droids and clones clashed over strategic locations, while planetary governance struggled to maintain civic order amid escalating violence. Sidious' hand remained unseen, influencing outcomes without appearing to intervene. Every supply line disrupted, every alliance strengthened or broken, every minor victory or loss was orchestrated to maintain the perception of natural consequence rather than calculated manipulation. At the same time, Sidious manipulated the perception of both sides to ensure dependency on centralized leadership. The Republic required guidance in managing the widespread chaos, while the Separatists relied on the perceived competence of their leaders to maintain loyalty. Sidious, ever the puppet master, guided both forces simultaneously, ensuring that neither could achieve absolute dominance, yet both advanced toward the conditions necessary for his ultimate control. Key figures emerged within the conflict whose actions Sidious had anticipated. Anakin Skywalker, brash, impulsive and gifted with extraordinary skill in the Force, proved to be both a potential ally and a variable to manipulate. His victories on the battlefield were carefully observed, every decision analyzed for moral and psychological patterns. Sidious noted Skywalker's impatience, his attachment, and his fear of loss. Understanding these traits would one day be pivotal in bending him fully to the dark side. Countless battles unfolded, each with unique strategies and unexpected outcomes. Sidious did not intervene directly, but ensured that the larger narrative always conformed to his grand plan. He allowed the Jedi victories to build confidence, knowing that such triumphs would later amplify their fall when confronted with the carefully orchestrated crises of trust, loyalty, and morality. And similarly, he permitted Separatist victories in areas where it would strengthen their confidence, giving them the illusion of independence, while still guiding them toward predetermined outcomes. On Coruscant, the political theater intensified alongside the battlefield chaos. The Senate debated endlessly, often failing to take decisive action. As Sidious had predicted, he guided votes subtly, recommended committee assignments, and ensured that key allies were strategically positioned to provide support at critical junctures. The appearance of dysfunction within the Republic reinforced Sidious's growing image as a calm, rational, indispensable authority. Through this chaos, Sidious also prepared contingency plans for the Jedi themselves. He knew that the Order, guided by principle, would eventually be tested beyond its limits. He orchestrated situations designed to isolate key Jedi, force them into impossible choices, and push their morality against the raw pragmatism of war. Every Jedi engagement, from large-scale battles to individual confrontations, served both immediate strategic purposes and long-term psychological conditioning. The Clone Wars were not simply battles of ships, troops, and planetary control. They were a study in manipulation, perception, and preparation. Sidious's genius lay in orchestrating the war as a living experiment, one in which he controlled both the variables and the outcomes without revealing his own involvement. Every tragedy, Every victory, every moral dilemma was carefully constructed to further his ultimate goal, the destruction of the Jedi Order and the transformation of the Republic into an empire under his command. At the same time, he nurtured his public persona, continuing to appear as a senator concerned with justice, order, and the welfare of the Republic. Citizens and politicians alike saw a leader striving to maintain stability amidst chaos, completely unaware that the chaos itself had been orchestrated by that very leader. This duality, puppet master and public servant, became the defining characteristic of Sidious's strategy during the Clone Wars. Meanwhile, Count Dooku, executing his role as the separatist figurehead, remained unaware of the full extent of Sidious's control. Dooku's charisma and leadership attracted systems to the separatist cause, yet he acted only within the framework Sidious had constructed. Every move Dooku made, every decision and every battle was subtly guided to advance Sidious's long-term agenda without revealing the hand behind the curtain. As the war continued, the Jedi grew increasingly stretched and divided. Strategic errors, miscommunications, and the pressure of moral imperatives created openings that Sidious quietly exploited. Each engagement, no matter how minor it seemed, contributed to a larger psychological and tactical map that Sidious was constructing, a map that would eventually enable him to bring the Jedi to ruin with precision. Even as galaxies burned and systems wavered between loyalty and rebellion, Sidious maintained a sense of calm, patience, and calculated foresight. He allowed the Clone Wars to unfold like a slowly turning wheel, each revolution bringing the galaxy closer to a point from which it could not return. And through every confrontation, every negotiation, and every battle, he ensured that both the Republic and the Separatists remained tethered, unwittingly, to his ultimate vision. In this way, the Clone Wars became not only a conflict of armies, but a war of perception, morality, and unseen influence. Sidious had transformed every skirmish, every political maneuver, and every Jedi intervention into a carefully orchestrated piece of his grand design. And as the galaxy bled, as countless lives were caught in the tide of engineered chaos, the Sith Lord's shadow stretched ever longer, preparing for the moment when all would bend to his will. As the Clone Wars progressed, the Jedi Order found itself stretched across countless star systems, their numbers finite, their influence vast, but increasingly ineffective. The constant strain of battle forced Jedi generals to make decisions that would have been unthinkable in times of peace. Every conflict, every campaign, and every engagement became a test not only of their combat prowess, but of their ethical foundations. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily upon them, and in the quiet moments between battles, many questioned whether their guiding principles were sufficient to protect the galaxy. Anakin Skywalker, young, gifted, and fiercely devoted to the ideals of the Jedi, emerged as both a hero and a liability in equal measure. His brilliance in battle was matched only by his impulsiveness, a trait that Sidious observed with meticulous interest. Every daring maneuver, every act of courage, and every moral compromise was noted, catalogued, and stored as information to be used when the apprentice would one day face temptation. Anakin's attachment to those he loved, particularly Padme Amidala, became a focal point in Sidious's subtle manipulations, a vulnerability that would eventually be the key to breaking the Jedi's moral defenses. The Jedi Council, sensing the strain on Anakin's character and abilities, sought to guide him, to temper his impulsiveness with wisdom and patience. They offered counsel, assigned mentors, and attempted to instill discipline, yet the young Jedi's frustration with the limitations imposed by protocol grew steadily. He witnessed countless systems plunged into chaos, countless innocents caught in the crossfire, and he began to wonder if the Jedi's code of restraint was sufficient to truly protect the galaxy. Sidious, ever patient, allowed these doubts to accumulate, weaving subtle suggestions into conversations, missions, and encounters designed to intensify Anakin's sense of urgency and moral conflict. Meanwhile, the Separatist forces, guided indirectly by Sidious, continued to escalate the war. Battles grew larger, more destructive, and increasingly symbolic of the Republic's inability to maintain order. Planets were devastated, populations displaced, and political alliances strained to the breaking point. Every act of rebellion, every military misstep, Every failure of diplomacy reinforced the perception that the galaxy required a singular, decisive authority to maintain peace. Within the Jedi Order, whispers of discontent and concern began to grow. Some questioned the Republic's leadership, some doubted the effectiveness of their own strategies, and others wondered whether the war itself was a manipulation too subtle to perceive. Yet the greatest crisis was internal, centered around Anakin Skywalker and the intensifying tension between personal loyalty and duty to the Order. Sidious knew that the young Jedi's mind was a fertile ground for influence, and he began carefully planting ideas that promised control, security, the power to prevent loss. The Chancellor Palpatine maintained the guise of mentorship, appearing to offer guidance in times of stress, counsel during moments of doubt, and comfort during personal turmoil. Anakin, longing for certainty in an uncertain galaxy, gravitated toward him, unaware that every word was part of an intricate web of seduction, strategy, and manipulation. Sidious spoke of fear, loss, and destiny, planting the notion that the Jedi's caution was a weakness and that true power could protect those he loved. Each conversation was a carefully orchestrated step toward the young Jedi's eventual surrender, executed with patience and subtlety over years of seemingly benign guidance. Simultaneously, Sidious continued to engineer the political collapse of the Republic. He used crises, delays in legislation, and the chaos of war to reinforce the perception that the government was inefficient, indecisive, and incapable of maintaining order. The Senate, stretched thin and unable to respond effectively to widespread rebellion, increasingly turned to Palpatine as a stabilizing presence. Each plea for guidance, each vote for emergency powers, each crisis resolved through subtle manipulation, further concentrated authority in the Chancellor's hands. The Jedi, despite their growing awareness of Palpatine's influence, were hampered by their own principles. They hesitated to act aggressively, constrained by law, ethics, and the fear of overreach. Their indecision, however justified, only deepened the perception that the Republic needed a strong, singular leader to prevent collapse. Sidious, watching from the shadows, recognized that this tension between principle and necessity was the perfect environment to cultivate Anakin's eventual fall. Key events began to converge. Missions that seemed isolated were in fact components of a broader design. The Jedi faced moral dilemmas that tested loyalty, compassion, and judgment, while separatist victories created urgency and fear among the populace. Anakin, witnessing suffering and loss on a scale previously unimaginable, began to internalize the belief that decisive action, even if morally ambiguous, was necessary to prevent catastrophe. Simultaneously, the Sith teachings, transmitted indirectly through Palpatine, emphasized control over destiny and mastery over life and death. Anakin, desperate to prevent the death of those he loved, found these ideas compelling, though he did not yet recognize their origin or their danger. Every whispered suggestion, every philosophical debate, and every subtle illustration of power was absorbed into his consciousness, laying the groundwork for his eventual surrender to the dark side. As the war continued, individual battles grew in scale and significance. Entire planetary populations were caught between clone armies and droid forces, experiencing devastation, displacement, and loss that tested the limits of Jedi compassion. Anakin's heroism became legendary, yet with each victory came greater responsibility, heavier conscience, and deepening frustration with the Jedi Order's insistence on restraint. Sidious observed quietly, allowing the young Jedi's successes and failures to reinforce the subtle narrative that only through power and decisive action could true peace be achieved. The culmination of these years of manipulation, observation, and patient orchestration began to crystallize into the final stages of Anakin's transformation. He became increasingly isolated, torn between loyalty to the Jedi, devotion to Padme, and the growing belief that only one path could save the people he loved from inevitable suffering. Palpatine, maintaining the guise of a mentor, nurtured these fears, guiding him toward the conclusion that the Jedi were insufficient to prevent loss, and that their rigidity was a liability. At the same time, Sidious prepared contingencies to eliminate any Jedi who might resist or expose his plan. Clones loyal to the Chancellor were strategically positioned, battle plans adjusted to isolate key figures, and communications monitored to ensure no variable could upset the orchestration. The galaxy, embroiled in war, remained unaware that this conflict was not merely political or military. It was the final laboratory for the Sith's ultimate design. In this crucible of war, Anakin Skywalker's identity began to shift. Heroism became burdened with guilt, victory intertwined with grief, and loyalty conflicted with the desire for control. Sidious influence, subtle but persistent, created a pathway toward power that promised protection, mastery, and the prevention of loss, all framed as the ultimate responsibility of the Jedi Knight. And yet, the young Jedi remained unaware that each step he took was not toward freedom or salvation, but toward the embrace of the very darkness he had been trained to resist. As the Clone Wars reached their apex, systems across the galaxy teetered between rebellion and allegiance, chaos and control. The Jedi were stretched thin, the Separatists emboldened, and Palpatine's influence absolute, yet invisible to all who did not see the patterns beneath the surface. Every engagement, every negotiation, every act of heroism and every moral compromise converged toward the moment when the Republic would be transformed into the Empire, and Anakin Skywalker would emerge as Darth Vader, enforcer of the Sith's final design. And in this shadowed, tense, and meticulously prepared environment, the stage was set for the final collapse of the Jedi and the birth of a dark power that would dominate the galaxy for decades to come. And so the galaxy entered a new era, defined by the suppression of freedom, the centralization of power, and the shadow of the Sith over every world. The Jedi, scattered and hunted, became whispers and legends, while the Clone Wars, once a crucible of morality and heroism, had been transformed into a mechanism of destruction and consolidation. Darth Vader, a figure of mythic terror, walked a path forged by both personal tragedy and the patient orchestration of a master manipulator, Palpatine, whose vision of the galaxy was now fully realized. And yet, in the quiet corners of the galaxy, in hidden refuges and remote planets, the memory of the Jedi endured. Survivors carried knowledge, hope, and the potential for resistance, seeds that would one day grow into defiance against the darkness. But for now, the Empire reigned supreme. Darth Vader executed the will of his master with relentless precision, and the galaxy remained under the shadow of the Sith, the consequences of centuries of manipulation, ambition, and deception fully realized. The moment had been prepared for decades, layers upon layers of subtle influence, patient manipulation, and meticulous orchestration converging into a single, decisive act. Order 66, a command hidden within the programming of the clone army, awaited only the proper trigger. The clones, conditioned to obey without question, carried within them the seeds of the Republic's collapse, a tool designed by the Sith to eliminate the Jedi entirely. As the signal was transmitted, galaxy-spanning communications carried the instruction to every unit, from the front lines of battle to the quiet outposts on distant, unsuspecting worlds. The Jedi, immersed in the chaos of the Clone Wars, remained unaware that the very soldiers they had fought alongside for years were about to betray them. In countless systems across countless battlefields, clones turned against their commanding officers, striking with precision and efficiency that left little room for escape. Masters and knights who had once guided, protected, and trained these soldiers found themselves confronted by familiar faces, now wielding blasters in ruthless obedience. The shock of betrayal was instantaneous and profound, destabilizing the Jedi both strategically and emotionally. In those moments, long-held principles of restraint and compassion clashed with the immediate reality of mortal danger. Many Jedi attempted to reason with the clones, appealing to their loyalty, their sense of justice, and the bonds forged through years of shared struggle. But the programming was absolute, and the Jedi found themselves helpless against the overwhelming force of those they had once trusted implicitly. Simultaneously, Palpatine revealed himself fully, discarding the mask of the Republic's benevolent leader. His voice, calm, commanding, and terrifying in its certainty, reached Anakin Skywalker and every corner of the galaxy. He declared the necessity of a new order, the end of the Jedi, and the consolidation of power under the Sith. A carefully constructed narrative of the Separatists' threat, the Republic's inefficiency, and the Jedi's perceived failures now served as justification for mass extermination. Anakin Skywalker, witnessing the executions and the apparent futility of resistance, felt the final fissures in his morality widen. Fear, grief, and the desperate desire to protect Padme consumed him, clouding the judgment that had once guided his every action. Palpatine, sensing the perfect moment, offered the ultimate solution: the power to prevent loss, to protect life, and to impose order on chaos, all through mastery of the dark side of the Force. Anakin, driven by love, fear, and ambition, took the final step that would transform him irrevocably into Darth Vader, executor of the Sith will. Across the galaxy, Jedi resistance was swiftly and methodically dismantled. Temples were stormed, councils were annihilated, and loyalists fell to weapons they had once wielded alongside their allies. Every planet that had supported the Republic faced the stark reality of the Jedi's sudden absence, their protectorate gone in an instant, leaving political and social chaos in its wake. The moral authority that had guided the galaxy for millennia crumbled, replaced by fear, obedience, and the shadow of a new empire. In the midst of this, Anakin, now fully Darth Vader, hunted down the remaining Jedi who had not yet been eradicated. Temples, remote training outposts, and hidden enclaves were systematically. He moved with a terrifying combination of precision, power, and the emotional fury of a man who believed that absolute control was necessary to prevent greater loss. Each confrontation reinforced his transformation, binding him irrevocably to the dark side while extinguishing the ideals that had once defined him. Meanwhile, Palpatine consolidated control of the Republic, transforming it into the Galactic Empire. The Senate, coerced, manipulated, or intimidated, acquiesced to the transition of power, and dissenting voices were silenced or removed. Political structures that had once balanced justice, diplomacy, and law were replaced with centralized authority under the Emperor, guided by fear rather than principle. The galaxy, still reeling from the destruction of the Jedi and the devastation of the Clone Wars, accepted the new order as inevitable, unchangeable, and to many necessary. The psychological impact on surviving Jedi was immense. Some fled into exile, hiding on distant, obscure worlds, constantly vigilant against detection. Others went into hiding within political systems, subtly resisting where possible, yet unable to affect the larger course of the Empire's expansion. The loss of comrades, the betrayal of trusted soldiers, and the apparent complicity of the Republic's leadership left deep scars on all who survived. For Darth Vader, the transformation was both external and internal. His body, shattered in combat, required mechanical augmentation, binding him physically to the suit that would become his emblem. His mind, reshaped by grief, fear, and the intoxicating power of the dark side, became a fortress of control, discipline, and unwavering loyalty to the Sith. In every action, from the smallest mission to the suppression of entire worlds, he demonstrated the terrifying efficiency of a being forged by fear, ambition, and the will of a master manipulator. Palpatine's victory was complete, yet his attention remained on the subtle threads of influence that would maintain control. Rebellions, dissent, and the memory of the Jedi persisted as undercurrents in the galaxy, and he knew that vigilance, manipulation, and occasional displays of power would be required to sustain dominion. Darth Vader, as his enforcer, became both the instrument and symbol of that control, embodying the consequences of defiance and the terrifying reach of the Sith. And so, the galaxy entered a new era, defined by the suppression of freedom, the centralization of power, and the shadow of the Sith over every world. The Jedi, scattered and hunted, became whispers and legends, while the Clone Wars, once a crucible of morality and heroism, had been transformed into a mechanism of destruction and consolidation. Darth Vader, a figure of mythic terror, walked a path forged by both personal tragedy and the patient orchestration of a master manipulator. Palpatine, whose vision of the galaxy was now fully realized. And yet in the quiet corners of the galaxy, in hidden refuges and remote planets, the memory of the Jedi endured. Survivors carried knowledge, hope, and the potential for resistance, seeds that would one day grow into defiance against the darkness. But for now, the Empire reigned supreme. Darth Vader executed the will of his master with relentless precision, and the galaxy remained under the shadow of the Sith, the consequences of centuries of manipulation, ambition, and deception fully realized. With the fall of the Jedi and the proclamation of the Galactic Empire, a new order swept across the galaxy, swift, methodical, and absolute. Worlds that had once enjoyed varying degrees of autonomy now felt the full weight of centralized authority, a subtle and unyielding force that permeated every facet of life. Governors were replaced with imperial appointees, bureaucracies were streamlined to serve the Emperor's vision, and the remaining military forces were reorganized under direct control to ensure loyalty and efficiency. Darth Vader, clad in black armor and bound by both technology and the dark side, became the living embodiment of the Empire's will. He was a figure of terror and awe, moving across star systems to enforce compliance, eliminate pockets of resistance, and hunt down the remaining Jedi. Each mission, each confrontation, each subtle manipulation of planetary governance reinforced the myth of his invincibility. Vader's presence was both psychological and physical. The very knowledge of his proximity caused fear, hesitation, and submission long before his arrival. The Emperor's strategy was meticulous. He understood that fear alone could maintain control, but the appearance of justice and order would cement loyalty among the populace. Vader, as his instrument, ensured that both elements were present: swift punishment for defiance, careful guidance to those willing to cooperate, and subtle influence over leaders to maintain stability. The galaxy, still recovering from the Clone Wars, often accepted these measures, interpreting them as the necessary hand of order rather than the oppressive grip of a dark overlord. The hunt for Jedi survivors became a near-obsessive focus for Vader. Every rumor, every hidden enclave, every whispered story of a Force-sensitive individual was catalogued and pursued with relentless determination. The remaining Jedi, scattered and wary, became shadows themselves, avoiding detection while seeking ways to preserve knowledge and continue their legacy. Vader's pursuit was not merely physical, it was psychological, aimed at crushing hope, instilling fear, and demonstrating that no corner of the galaxy was beyond the reach of the Empire. Despite his terrifying efficiency, Vader's journey was marked by constant internal struggle. Memories of Anakin Skywalker, of past loyalties, of lost friends and loved ones, surfaced intermittently, creating a subtle tension between duty and residual emotion. The Emperor, aware of this inner conflict, manipulated it expertly, encouraging the channeling of grief, anger, and attachment into dark side power. Vader's mastery of the Force grew in direct proportion to his submission to these emotions, each act of control and destruction reinforcing the bond between master and apprentice. In parallel, the Empire's military might expanded. Star destroyers, fleets of TIE fighters, and ground forces solidified dominance across countless star systems, their presence a constant reminder of Imperial authority. Vader moved alongside this military expansion, guiding campaigns, enforcing compliance, and demonstrating the ruthless precision of the Sith's strategic vision. Planets that had once resisted the Republic now faced the full force of Imperial discipline, and resistance became both rare and increasingly dangerous. Within the bureaucracy, Imperial governors learned to navigate both fear and reward, understanding that Vader's inspection, influence, or wrath could arrive at any moment. Systems that adhered to policy were rewarded with stability and resources, while those that hesitated or resisted were subjected to brutal demonstrations of power. Vader, however, often acted alone, appearing suddenly, moving silently through corridors of power or across the surface of besieged planets, leaving a trail of calculated terror in his wake. Beyond enforcement, Vader became an architect of the Empire's psychological dominance. He cultivated a persona that merged myth with reality. Stories of invincibility spread among soldiers and citizens alike, ensuring that fear was as much a weapon as any blaster or lightsaber. Even the most loyal citizens and imperial officers deferred to the shadow of his presence, internalizing obedience long before action was demanded. This psychological control extended to the surviving Jedi, who found that even rumor and sighting were enough to disrupt planning and survival efforts. During this period, Vader's connection to the dark side deepened further. He became a master of intimidation, telekinesis, and force manipulation, capable of annihilating entire units, manipulating planetary environments, and even projecting his presence across vast distances. Yet, this power was not devoid of vulnerability. The remnants of Anakin's compassion and attachment occasionally surfaced, often exploited subtly by Palpatine to tighten control. Vader's internal struggle, though concealed beneath a veneer of unyielding authority, was a silent engine driving his relentless pursuit of perfection in service to the Emperor. Amidst this consolidation, the Empire began targeting independent organizations, smugglers, and minor resistance groups, perceiving them as threats to absolute dominance. Vader's presence became a symbol of inevitable retribution, ensuring that rebellion or defiance, however minor, was carefully calculated or suppressed entirely. Many groups disbanded or fled to remote sectors, aware that survival required evasion, secrecy, and in some cases the abandonment of moral certainty. Simultaneously, Vader's mastery over military strategy and force application allowed him to serve not only as enforcer, but as a tactical advisor to Palpatine. His input shaped campaigns, directed fleet movements, and orchestrated the elimination of potential insurrections before they could gain momentum. The combination of physical intimidation, psychological influence, and strategic brilliance established Vader as a central figure in the Empire, feared by enemies and allies alike. Even as he became a tool of suppression, Vader retained the capacity for meticulous observation. He monitored political allegiances, assessed threats to imperial stability, and evaluated the loyalty of officers and soldiers, ensuring that no variable escaped attention. This vigilance, combined with the dark side's amplification of his senses and perception, made him an almost omnipresent force across the galaxy. Vader's rise to infamy was thus both inevitable and meticulously constructed. Every mission, every confrontation, and every enforcement action served multiple purposes, consolidating imperial power, demonstrating the futility of resistance, and reinforcing his own mastery of the dark side. Planets learned that even the smallest act of defiance invited swift and uncompromising retribution, while officers learned that hesitation or misjudgment could lead to sudden lethal oversight by the Sith Lord. And yet, the man beneath the armor remained tethered to loss, memory, and the echoes of a life once lived. Even as he carried out acts of unimaginable cruelty and efficiency, the shadow of Anakin Skywalker lingered within the armor, a quiet reminder of what had been sacrificed in pursuit of absolute power. Palpatine's mastery ensured that these remnants of emotion were channeled, never fully liberated, always serving to strengthen the bond between master and apprentice. Across the galaxy, tales of Darth Vader spread, whispered in fear, recorded in imperial logs, and immortalized in both rumor and propaganda. From core worlds to outer rim territories, his name became synonymous with the Empire's dominance, a reminder that no rebellion, no hidden Jedi, and no independent thought could evade the reach of the Sith. Planets bent beneath the weight of compliance and citizens internalized obedience, their lives shaped by the constant presence of power that was both visible and unseen. Through this calculated combination of fear, respect, and myth, Darth Vader solidified his role as the Empire's ultimate instrument of control. The galaxy, still healing from the Clone Wars, adjusted to this new reality, interpreting Vader's dominance as necessary, inevitable, and complete. Resistance persisted, but it was scattered, fragile, and always shadowed by the knowledge that a single figure, a dark armored enforcer, could extinguish hope in an instant. And in this era of consolidation, the foundations for the future, rebellion, defiance, and eventual redemption were quietly being laid, imperceptible beneath the surface of imperial omnipotence. But for now, Darth Vader reigned supreme, executing Palpatine's will with terrifying precision. While the galaxy remained under the shadow of the Sith, the consequences of decades of manipulation and ambition fully realized. Even after the Jedi were all but destroyed, their legacy lingered in the galaxy like a faint, persistent echo. Hidden enclaves, remote temples, and obscure settlements became sanctuaries for those who had survived Order 66. These survivors, often traveling alone or in small groups, lived in constant vigilance, aware that Darth Vader and the Empire sought to extinguish every trace of their order. Every whisper of a Force sensitive, every rumor of resistance, every fragment of lore became a target for the Sith Lord, who pursued them with unrelenting precision. Vader's pursuit was both methodical and deeply personal. He did not hunt indiscriminately. He studied patterns, histories, and connections, seeking not just to eliminate enemies but to understand them, to anticipate their movements before they were made. In this way, the ghosts of the past, the Jedi who had trained him, the masters he had known, and even the memory of Anakin Skywalker shaped the methods of his hunt. Each encounter, whether successful or thwarted, was recorded in his mind, analyzed with the cold precision of the dark side, and used to refine future strategies. Planets that had once been hubs of Jedi activity became sites of systematic investigation. Temples were scoured, archives searched, and ancient records of Force sensitivity examined for signs of survivors. Vader's presence was often preceded by subtle signs: a quiet arrival in the system, the disappearance of minor officials, and the sudden collapse of communications, all contributing to an atmosphere of fear that made resistance nearly impossible. Even the most remote and hidden enclaves were not immune, as Vader's mastery of the Force allowed him to sense disturbances, track energy signatures, and detect the presence of Force-sensitive individuals over vast distances. The hunt was psychological as well as physical. Survivors of Order 66 lived in a constant state of tension, knowing that discovery could mean instant death. The knowledge that Darth Vader might appear at any moment created a persistent undercurrent of fear that shaped every decision, every movement, and every plan. This fear itself became a weapon, magnifying the sense of omnipresence that Vader cultivated, ensuring that even those who escaped physically were often trapped mentally. Some Jedi attempted to regroup, forming secret networks to share knowledge and train new generations in the ways of the Force. These groups moved constantly, relying on stealth, deception, and ancient Jedi teachings to remain undetected. Yet Vader's relentless pursuit often forced them into desperate decisions, splitting groups, abandoning safe havens, and leaving survivors to wonder if survival alone was truly enough. During these years, Vader's own mastery of the Force grew even further. He became capable of feats that inspired both awe and terror. Telekinetic force pushes that could collapse walls, precise manipulation of individuals' movements, and the ability to instill terror across entire populations without firing a single shot. These powers were honed not in isolation but through constant practice, every encounter with resistance, every confrontation with hidden Jedi, serving as both training and demonstration of his supremacy. The dark side fed on his emotions: anger, grief, frustration, and fear, turning them into fuel that amplified his abilities beyond the comprehension of ordinary beings. Yet beneath the armor and the power, traces of Anakin Skywalker remained, surfacing occasionally in fleeting memories of compassion, attachment, or regret. Palpatine, aware of this inner conflict, encouraged its suppression while directing it toward strengthening Vader's connection to the dark side. Every moment of hesitation was transformed into focus, every flash of memory into precision, ensuring that the apprentice remained both human and terrifyingly efficient as an instrument of Sith will. Throughout the galaxy, stories of Jedi survival persisted. Whispers of a lone master on a desert world, rumors of a hidden enclave in the forests of remote planets, and tales of shadowy figures guiding or protecting the innocent circulated quietly. These stories, often fragmented or exaggerated, kept hope alive in the hearts of some, while simultaneously drawing Vader's attention as he sought to extinguish even the perception of resistance. The pursuit was never-ending, a relentless cycle of tracking, confronting, and when necessary, eliminating any spark of defiance. Vader's approach combined tactical brilliance with psychological warfare. He understood that fear, anticipation, and uncertainty were as powerful as weapons or fleets of soldiers. Even the most isolated Jedi could feel the weight of his presence, the oppressive certainty that their efforts were being observed and analyzed. This constant pressure eroded confidence, broke alliances, and ensured that the few who remained were perpetually on the defensive. In addition to physical hunts, Vader employed deception and manipulation. Agents were placed in strategic locations to gather intelligence, false trails were used to flush out hidden Jedi, and propaganda subtly reinforced the inevitability of Imperial dominance. The galaxy itself became a tool of control, with systems policing themselves out of fear, whisper networks reporting anomalies, and information flows monitored to prevent coordination among survivors. Through these methods, Vader extended his influence far beyond his immediate reach, projecting power like a shadow that touched every corner of the galaxy. Over time, even minor acts of resistance were punished severely. Entire communities learned the consequences of harboring fugitives, training Jedi, or assisting escaped prisoners. The fear of Darth Vader became ingrained in the culture of countless planets, a silent yet omnipresent force shaping behavior, choices, and survival. Vader's reputation grew, not merely through deeds witnessed directly, but through the stories, warnings, and rumors carried by those who had encountered him or observed his influence from afar. Yet despite the apparent finality of the Empire's dominance, remnants of Jedi teachings survived. Some teachings were preserved in hidden holocrons, secret scrolls, or oral traditions passed from master to student in whispers and shadows. These remnants, though fragile, represented a continuity of hope and knowledge, a subtle counterweight to Vader's overwhelming power. The galaxy, while dominated by fear, still held seeds of resistance that, though unseen, would eventually grow into something significant. Vader's relentless pursuit of the Jedi became both obsession and duty, a defining aspect of his existence. Every mission reinforced his skill, honed his focus, and deepened his connection to the dark side, while simultaneously reminding him of the life he had lost, the choices he had made, and the man he had become. The armor, the mask, the presence of Ega, all were symbols of power, but beneath them lay a complex interplay of grief, ambition, and suppressed memory that shaped every action he took. The galaxy, for all its vastness, seemed smaller under the shadow of Darth Vader. Systems bent to the Empire, citizens internalized obedience, and any remaining Jedi were forced to live as ghosts, constantly moving, always cautious and perpetually aware that a single misstep could be fatal. Yet even in this darkness, the echoes of resistance persisted, small flickers of defiance and memory that whispered of a past order and the possibility of a future reckoning. Through this long, methodical campaign, Vader became more than a warrior. He became a symbol, a myth, and a warning. His name alone inspired fear, obedience, and reverence, while his actions created a universe in which survival required strategy, caution, and for the Jedi, almost impossible secrecy. And in the quiet, hidden places of the galaxy, the remaining Jedi held on to their teachings, their hope, and their knowledge, waiting, moving, and surviving under the oppressive shadow of the Empire's most feared enforcer. Even as the Empire solidified its dominance, whispers of rebellion began to circulate in the far reaches of the galaxy. Small, scattered groups of former senators, defected officers, and surviving Jedi loyalists began coordinating in secret, forming the first fragile threads of organized resistance. Though few in number, these early rebels represented a spark of defiance, a reminder that even under the shadow of Darth Vader and the Empire, the will to resist had not been extinguished. Vader, ever vigilant, perceived these stirrings, not just as threats to Imperial order, but as reminders of the Jedi he had once been, the ideals he had abandoned, and the life he had lost. These feelings, buried beneath layers of anger, loyalty to the Emperor, and mastery of the dark side, occasionally surfaced as fleeting doubts or moments of hesitation. Palpatine, aware of these subtle vulnerabilities, encouraged Vader to suppress them, channeling every trace of residual emotion into greater power and greater ruthlessness. Despite this, Vader could not entirely escape the echoes of his past. Memories of Obi-Wan Kenobi, of Padme Amidala, of his own children, and of the camaraderie of the Jedi Order haunted him in quiet moments, sometimes in dreams, sometimes in fleeting glimpses during meditation. These internal conflicts manifested not as weakness in combat, but as a quiet, persistent undercurrent, shaping his approach to the galaxy and the subtle strategies he employed in pursuit of enemies. The early rebels, aware that they were being hunted by a figure of near-mythic power, learned to operate in shadows, moving from system to system, relying on secrecy, deception, and intelligence networks. They communicated in coded messages, established hidden safe houses, and occasionally coordinated minor strikes against Imperial targets to disrupt supply lines and gather resources. Though small in scale, these actions carried symbolic significance, a declaration that the galaxy was not yet entirely subdued, and that the dark shadow of the Empire could be challenged. Vader's response was precise, methodical, and terrifyingly effective. He would appear suddenly, often in the midst of chaos, his presence alone enough to scatter forces, destroy resistance, and instill fear in those who had dared to hope. Each encounter reinforced the message that resistance was not only dangerous but futile in the face of the Empire's might and his own mastery of the dark side. Yet in these confrontations, the subtle traces of Anakin Skywalker occasionally influenced his decisions, manifesting as hesitation, curiosity, or even the sparing of certain individuals when the outcome did not threaten the Emperor's broader plan. The internal conflict deepened as Vader encountered remnants of the Jedi Order. He faced former allies and teachers, men and women whose names had once inspired trust, friendship, and respect. Confronting them required not only physical domination but a psychological reckoning, a negotiation between the man he had been and the Sith he had become. Some encounters ended in destruction, others in pursuit and prolonged hunts, and still others were marked by an almost imperceptible hesitation that reflected his lingering humanity. Vader's psychological landscape was shaped by dualities, loyalty and rebellion, fear and hope, past and present. The dark side magnified his power, but also served as a lens through which he viewed the galaxy, filtering every interaction, every mission, every plan through both his strategic genius and his suppressed emotion. Even in absolute moments of control, these dualities introduced complexities, subtle vulnerabilities that, if understood by his enemies, could have been exploited. Meanwhile, the early rebellion gradually adapted to the oppressive reach of the Empire. They established hidden outposts on remote moons, developed covert communication systems, and trained in secrecy to resist the hunting force of Darth Vader and Imperial enforcers. These rebels relied heavily on stealth, guile, and the understanding that brute force alone could never match the power of a Sith Lord who embodied both the dark side and the authority of the Empire. In his campaigns against these groups, Vader often displayed a combination of relentless pursuit and strategic subtlety. He did not merely seek to destroy, he sought to understand, to anticipate, and to outmaneuver. He used informants, surveillance, and indirect manipulation to flush out rebel cells, ensuring that by the time he arrived, the outcomes were already predetermined by fear, confusion, and miscalculation induced by his presence. This approach magnified his efficiency and reinforced the notion that resistance, however clever, was ultimately doomed without extraordinary caution and luck. Yet paradoxically, the rebellion also forced Vader to confront his own past continuously. Encounters with surviving Jedi or Force-sensitive individuals reminded him of his former ideals, his compassion, and the life that had been stolen by fear and ambition. These confrontations were often violent and decisive, but the memory of Anakin Skywalker lingered, influencing subtle choices in timing, target selection, and method. It was a constant tension between absolute obedience to the Emperor and the faint, persistent echo of a man who once dreamed of peace, justice, and protection for those he loved. As the Empire expanded, so too did the complexity of the hunt. Rebel cells communicated across vast distances, and survivors employed increasingly sophisticated tactics to avoid detection. Vader, in response, refined his methods, developing intuition, predictive analysis, and a psychological understanding of patterns and behavior that made him an almost omniscient hunter. Every escape, every near miss, and every hidden enclave contributed to his learning, sharpening both skill and perception. The psychological warfare component became ever more critical. Rebels learned that fear alone could destabilize their operations, and Vader exploited this relentlessly. Even the mere rumor of his approach could scatter resistance, force mistakes, and disrupt communication networks, demonstrating the terrifying efficiency of combining power, intelligence, and reputation. In this way, the galaxy itself became a silent battlefield, with citizens and combatants alike constrained by the unseen but omnipresent shadow of Darth Vader. In parallel, Vader continued to wrestle with the memory of Padme, of the love that had driven him to the dark side. Though suppressed, these memories occasionally influenced decisions in subtle, almost imperceptible ways, guiding his actions and reactions in moments of choice. These glimpses of humanity did not undermine his authority, but added depth to the figure that the galaxy feared, a reminder that beneath the mask and armor, a complex mind and tormented soul remained. Vader's campaign against the early rebellion set the stage for decades of conflict, shaping both his own legend and the strategies that would later be employed by the Alliance to restore the Republic. He became not only the executioner of Imperial will, but also a symbol of relentless pursuit, a study in the duality of fear and precision, of power and suppressed emotion. The galaxy, in its vastness, was dominated by his shadow. Yet in hidden corners, hope endured, fragile but persistent, waiting for a future moment when the scales might tip. Every system he visited, every rebel cell he encountered, and every hidden Jedi he pursued contributed to the intricate tapestry of the Empire's control and the legend of Darth Vader. Even as his enemies adapted, his mastery of strategy, force manipulation, and psychological intimidation ensured that he remained several steps ahead, the embodiment of an unstoppable force moving through the galaxy. The early rebellion, though small, was both a threat and a reminder that even in the darkest times, fragments of light could survive, hidden and enduring beneath the oppressive weight of fear and power. And through it all, Darth Vader continued to walk the fine line between the man he had been and the enforcer he had become. The galaxy knew him as a symbol of terror, an agent of the Emperor, and a master of the dark side. But beneath the black armor and the mask, a complex mind wrestled with memory, loss, and the faint echoes of a soul that had once sought justice and love. As years passed, the scattered embers of rebellion began to coalesce into a more organized opposition. Small at first, but gradually gaining confidence, numbers, and reach. Former senators, disillusioned officers, and those who had witnessed the atrocities of the Empire united under secret banners, exchanging intelligence, supplies, and careful strategies to avoid the omnipresent gaze of Darth Vader. These early formations, though primitive compared to the full alliance that would later emerge, represented a growing challenge to the absolute control that the Empire sought to impose across the galaxy. Vader, ever perceptive, recognized these developments with a mixture of irritation, calculation, and professional fascination. He did not see the rebellion merely as an enemy to be destroyed. He saw it as a puzzle, a network of weaknesses and patterns that, if understood, could be manipulated to perfection. Every act of defiance, every communication intercepted, and every small victory achieved by the rebels became data to be analyzed, catalogued, and used to predict future actions. The early rebel groups were forced to operate in extreme secrecy. Safe houses were hidden on remote moons, cloaked by force-sensitive guardians, natural terrain, or even complex urban subterfuge. Movements were planned meticulously, relying on coded messages, brief encounters, and rapid dispersal to avoid detection. Even a single mistake, a misinterpreted signal, or an unguarded conversation could draw Vader to their location with terrifying speed and precision. Vader's campaigns against these growing cells became exercises in strategic mastery. He studied maps, monitored communications, and applied predictive reasoning, informed both by the Force and his own intelligence network. No movement went unnoticed for long, no assembly remained hidden, and every small rebellion that surfaced was met with a calculated and overwhelming response. His efficiency became legendary, Entire cells were neutralized before they could launch an operation, entire planets stabilized by the mere threat of his arrival. Yet, within these operations, subtle traces of Anakin Skywalker influenced his methods. Vader occasionally demonstrated restraint, curiosity, or even tactical mercy when the circumstances allowed, not because of weakness, but as a controlled application of his insight into human behavior. He understood fear, loyalty, and hope, and he used this understanding to manipulate outcomes beyond brute force. The psychological aspect of his strategy was as important as the physical. Rebellion was often defeated before a lightsaber was drawn or a starship fired. Vader's mastery of the Force became an essential instrument of this campaign. He sensed disturbances across vast distances, feeling ripples in the energy field where rebel activity stirred. Even subtle actions, such as a hidden communicator transmitting a signal or a small gathering of insurgents, could draw his attention, allowing him to strike with precision that seemed preternatural to those he hunted. This ability created an almost omnipresent aura of dread, as if the galaxy itself were aware that Vader could appear anywhere at any moment. The rebels, despite careful planning, were acutely aware of the risks. They learned to move constantly, change locations, and rely on misdirection to avoid detection. The knowledge that Vader could arrive without warning created constant tension, shaping both individual behavior and collective strategies. Their victories, when they occurred, were often brief and cautious, overshadowed by the understanding that the Sith Lord was always watching, always calculating, and always waiting. Vader's strategic brilliance extended beyond immediate combat operations. He manipulated political structures, influenced governors, and used imperial bureaucracy to anticipate and prevent resistance before it could manifest physically. Planets that might have been breeding grounds for insurgency were monitored, their citizens subtly guided toward compliance, and those with tendencies toward defiance were marginalized, relocated, or eliminated. In this way, the galaxy itself became a chessboard, with Vader controlling pieces both visible and hidden, shaping outcomes long before direct confrontation became necessary. This period also saw the refinement of intelligence networks under Vader's supervision. Informants, spies, and surveillance technologies were deployed across key systems, ensuring that even isolated activities could be detected and addressed. Vader's understanding of human and organizational behavior allowed him to anticipate patterns, predict movements, and often appear in places rebels considered secure. The psychological impact of his reputation amplified the effectiveness of these networks, as fear caused individuals to make mistakes or disclose information inadvertently. Vader's duality remained central to his success. The combination of Anakin's insight and the dark side's amplification created a uniquely potent form of command. He was ruthless when necessary, cunning in his strategy, and psychologically astute in ways that few could comprehend. Even the most seasoned Imperial officers deferred to his judgment, aware that his perception of the Force and his understanding of both enemies and allies surpassed conventional understanding. In the growing rebellion, small victories inspired hope but also attracted attention. Rebel leaders quickly realized that their efforts, while symbolically important, carried the risk of drawing Vader's direct intervention. This created a delicate balance. Act boldly enough to gain momentum, but cautiously enough to avoid annihilation, a tension that defined early rebel strategy for years. Every decision, every skirmish, every act of defiance became a calculated risk under the ever-watchful presence of the Sith Lord. Vader's campaigns forced rebels to innovate continually. Hidden communication methods, false trails, coded messages, and clandestine transportation networks became essential for survival. Even when small victories were achieved, the rebels knew they were temporary, as Vader's strategic foresight often revealed hidden patterns and connections. This constant cat-and-mouse game sharpened the skills, coordination, and resilience of those who opposed him, laying the foundation for the larger alliance to restore the Republic that would emerge later. At the same time, Vader's own identity as both man and Sith remained in flux. His internal conflicts, memories of Padme, his friendships with fellow Jedi, and the life he might have led, surfaced intermittently, influencing his approach to rebellion in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. These glimpses of Anakin were never weaknesses in combat, but they did create a layered approach to strategy, blending brute force with observation, manipulation, and psychological calculation. The galaxy, for all its fear, remained a complex system, and Vader's understanding of this complexity allowed him to dominate yet also adapt continuously. The cumulative effect of these years of pursuit was profound. Rebel groups learned to respect not only his power, but his strategy, his understanding of human behavior, and the silent inevitability that he could appear anywhere, at any time. The Empire's dominance was reinforced by these psychological victories as much as by fleets, armies, or weaponry. Fear, anticipation, and the constant presence of Vader became tools that extended far beyond the physical, shaping the galaxy's behavior and suppressing resistance before it could take tangible form. And yet, in these moments, small acts of defiance persisted. Hidden enclaves, secret communications, and quiet training of new recruits ensured that hope was not entirely extinguished, that the spark of rebellion continued, however dim and fragile it seemed. Vader's awareness of these efforts was both a source of professional challenge and an ongoing reminder of the human complexity that the dark side amplified, but never fully erased. The galaxy shadowed by his presence was not devoid of light. It was a tension-filled landscape where power, fear, strategy, and hope intertwined in a delicate and persistent balance. Through these campaigns, Darth Vader became more than a Sith enforcer. He became a master strategist, a psychological tactician, and a living symbol of the dark side's reach across space and time. The rebellion, growing yet fragile, ensured that his skills were tested continuously, honing both his perception and his ruthlessness, reinforcing his status as an almost unstoppable force moving through a galaxy that trembled beneath his shadow. As the years passed, the rebellion grew from scattered cells into a network of coordinated operations spanning multiple systems, small at first, but gradually expanding in reach and ambition. Former senators, defected Imperial officers, and those who had survived the horrors of the early Empire began communicating in secret, sharing intelligence and coordinating actions that, while limited, sent ripples of defiance across the galaxy. Each act of rebellion, no matter how minor, carried both practical and symbolic weight, challenging the narrative of Imperial invincibility that Darth Vader had worked tirelessly to enforce. Vader, ever vigilant, took note of these emerging patterns. To him, each group represented not only a tactical problem, but also a reflection of the tenacity and resilience of the human spirit, traits that both fascinated and infuriated him. He studied their movements with precision, analyzing their strategies, predicting their next steps, and calculating the most efficient way to suppress their growth while maintaining the illusion of control over the galaxy. Emerging leaders within the rebellion began to draw his attention more directly. These figures, often young, audacious, and deeply committed, represented the potential for organized opposition that could escalate beyond isolated attacks. Vader's encounters with them were a mixture of direct confrontation, strategic manipulation, and psychological observation, testing their resolve while simultaneously probing the limits of his own suppressed humanity. He understood that fear alone was not sufficient to extinguish determination, and that the persistence of hope could catalyze extraordinary courage, even in the face of certain death. The galaxy's outer rim became a primary theater for these interactions. Remote planets, hidden bases, and uncharted moons provided both refuge for rebel forces and hunting grounds for Vader. He approached each system with a combination of calculated patience and overwhelming force, often striking preemptively, based on intelligence and subtle cues sensed through the Force. Entire operations were neutralized before the rebels fully understood that they were being pursued, and those who survived were forced to adapt continuously to his presence. Vader's encounters with these emerging heroes were complex and layered. In some cases, he directly confronted leaders during assaults, his lightsaber cutting a path through opposition with lethal efficiency, yet leaving subtle signs of observation, teaching, or challenge. In other instances, he allowed minor escapes, studying the choices and methods of his adversaries, gathering insights into their psychology, their strategies, and the networks that sustain them. These moments, though rare and calculated, highlighted the interplay between fear, power, and insight that defined his approach to both the Empire and the galaxy's resistance. As the rebellion expanded, so too did the sophistication of their operations. They began employing advanced technology, covert communication systems, and strategic alliances to evade Imperial detection. The distribution of leadership and delegation of authority allowed them to remain agile, resilient, and adaptive, complicating Vader's efforts to extinguish them completely. Each victory for the rebellion, however small, was amplified by the symbolic weight it carried, inspiring hope and reinforcing the notion that the Empire's power was formidable but not absolute. Vader, aware of the growing threat, intensified his campaigns. He coordinated fleets, deployed elite agents, and utilized both military might and psychological tactics to destabilize operations before they could achieve momentum. Even the act of reporting rumors, sharing intelligence, or signaling defiance became a potential trigger for intervention, demonstrating the breadth of his influence and the omnipresence of his authority across the galaxy. In this way, the rebellion's expansion was both challenged and shaped by the relentless, strategic mastery of the Sith Lord. The emergence of these heroes also forced Vader to confront the enduring remnants of his past. He recognized qualities in them reminiscent of the Jedi he had once known, the allies he had once fought alongside, and the virtues he had abandoned. Though suppressed by the dark side, these reflections added nuance to his decisions, influencing how he approached conflict, confrontation, and the execution of Imperial will. The tension between Anakin Skywalker and Darth Vader manifested subtly in these interactions, creating a complex dynamic that neither his enemies nor his allies could fully comprehend. Vader's mastery of the Force continued to play a central role in these campaigns. He could sense subtle shifts in the energy field caused by the gathering of forces, the movement of individuals, or even the spread of hope among oppressed populations. This ability allowed him to anticipate attacks, identify vulnerabilities, and neutralize threats before they fully materialized, reinforcing the aura of inevitability that surrounded his presence. Rebels learned to fear not only his physical power but also the unseen awareness, the silent calculation, and the almost supernatural capacity for prediction that he wielded with chilling precision. In parallel, Vader began to exploit the rebellion's own strength against them. He manipulated information, created false signals, and used deception to induce errors, demonstrating that strategy, intelligence, and psychological insight could amplify the effectiveness of the dark side. Beyond raw power, this approach ensured that the galaxy was not merely subdued by force but also shaped by fear, anticipation, and the careful orchestration of perception, creating a near-perfect environment for the exercise of Imperial control. Despite this dominance, subtle victories persisted. Small cells managed to evade detection, conduct sabotage, and protect civilians, creating ripples of defiance that demonstrated the enduring potency of hope. These actions, though often temporary, contributed to a sense of possibility and resilience, reinforcing the notion that the galaxy's shadowed corners were not entirely controlled. The tension between suppression and survival, fear and courage, darkness and flickering light, defined the evolving relationship between Vader and the growing rebellion. Vader's encounters with these emerging heroes also deepened his understanding of leadership, strategy, and psychology. He observed not only military tactics, but also the ways in which individuals inspired, coordinated, and sustained morale under extreme pressure. This knowledge enhanced his ability to predict, manipulate, and dominate, turning each engagement into both a lesson and a demonstration of his power. Even when the rebellion succeeded in evading him temporarily, the intelligence and insight gained from the encounter fortified his approach to subsequent operations. In this period, the galaxy's narrative became increasingly complex. The Empire appeared invincible, yet small victories hinted at the possibility of change. Fear permeated society, yet courage persisted in hidden enclaves. Vader's omnipresent authority shaped every choice, every movement, every whispered plan, creating a constant tension between hope and despair, resistance and domination. As the rebellion gained momentum, Vader's campaigns grew more audacious and precise. Entire sectors were monitored, communication networks infiltrated, and intelligence analyzed with meticulous attention to detail. Even minor victories by rebel forces prompted immediate assessment, counteraction, and strategic recalibration, demonstrating the relentless efficiency of a Sith Lord who combined fear, skill, and foresight. Each confrontation reinforced the notion that survival required not only courage but adaptability, cunning, and an understanding of the ever-watchful presence that was Darth Vader. Through these engagements, Vader's legend expanded. He became not only an enforcer of the Emperor's will, but a figure whose presence shaped behavior across countless worlds, whose reputation amplified his power, and whose strategy ensured that fear, control, and psychological dominance were as critical as any weapon or fleet. The galaxy, though vast, felt smaller under his shadow, as if every system, every planet, and every corner of space were touched by his awareness, judgment, and influence. And yet, even in the midst of these triumphs, the subtle human traces persisted. Moments of reflection, fleeting memories of Padme, faint echoes of friendship, and glimpses of compassion shaped his methods in ways imperceptible to most, adding depth to the terror he inspired. This duality, man and Sith, past and present, fear and strategy, defined every encounter, every victory, and every confrontation with the emerging heroes of the rebellion. As the rebellion spread across the galaxy, its structure grew increasingly sophisticated, transforming from a network of scattered cells into a coordinated force capable of launching multi-system operations, small victories, and strategic strikes against Imperial installations. Vader, ever vigilant, observed these developments with a combination of professional assessment, strategic calculation, and the faint, imperceptible stirrings of the man he had once been. He understood that the rebellion's growing organization represented both a tactical challenge and a symbolic threat, demonstrating that even under the Empire's iron rule, hope could endure. The expanding threat forced Vader to intensify his campaigns, combining the raw power of the dark side with meticulous strategy and psychological manipulation. He orchestrated military operations with precision, coordinating fleet movements, deploying specialized forces, and utilizing intelligence networks that spanned the galaxy. Even minor rebel activities were analyzed, predicted, and countered, ensuring that any opportunity for uprising was mitigated before it could achieve momentum. This constant vigilance created an atmosphere of unrelenting tension, where rebellion was possible but perilously dangerous. In the midst of this growing conflict, Vader's encounters with emerging rebel leaders became increasingly personal and consequential. He faced figures who were courageous, intelligent, and determined, individuals whose actions not only challenged the Empire but also mirrored the qualities he had once admired in Jedi allies. Each confrontation tested his ability to balance ruthless efficiency with subtle judgment, forcing him to adapt tactics in real time while maintaining his role as the Emperor's enforcer. Even as he destroyed infrastructure and neutralized key personnel, he observed patterns of behavior, strategies, and weaknesses that could be leveraged for future engagements. The psychological impact of Vader's presence on both the rebellion and Imperial forces was profound. Rebel operatives learned to fear not only his power but his insight, intuition, and the seeming inevitability of his arrival. Imperial officers, in turn, deferred to him with a mixture of respect and fear, recognizing that his understanding of the Force and human behavior surpassed their own, and that failure in his presence carried consequences beyond measure. Vader's strategic mastery extended beyond direct confrontation into subtle manipulation and deception. He seeded misinformation, intercepted communications, and created false impressions to force rebel mistakes. Entire operations were destabilized before a single skirmish, and rebel leaders found themselves reacting to moves they did not fully understand, as if the galaxy itself was subtly aligned to reveal their vulnerabilities. This blend of fear, power, and intelligence ensured that even a growing rebellion remained under the shadow of his influence, constantly adapting yet never fully escaping his grasp. Meanwhile, Vader's personal struggles continued beneath the mask and armor. Memories of Padme, fleeting images of his children, and faint recollections of comrades lost to the dark side surfaced occasionally, influencing his choices in subtle ways. These moments never undermined his authority or tactical brilliance, but they added nuance to his approach, creating a complex interplay between ruthless reinforcer and man haunted by loss. The duality between Anakin Skywalker and Darth Vader, between past compassion and present dominance, shaped every interaction, every battle, and every engagement with the rebellion. As the rebellion escalated, the tactics became more sophisticated, spanning intelligence gathering, sabotage, and the orchestration of covert alliances. They relied on stealth, deception, and rapid adaptation to survive against an opponent who could sense movements across the galaxy with the Force. Even the most careful plans were subject to Vader's attention, and his interventions were both immediate and devastating, reinforcing his reputation as an unstoppable hunter. Yet, the rebellion persisted, demonstrating resilience and ingenuity that forced Vader to evolve his methods. He adapted not only his combat strategies, but also his understanding of human psychology, leadership, and organizational behavior. He learned to anticipate risk-taking, to exploit overconfidence, and to manipulate both fear and hope, turning the intangible elements of morale and belief into instruments of control. In doing so, he refined his dominance across both physical and psychological dimensions, becoming a force that could anticipate, influence, and dismantle opposition before it fully materialized. The galaxy itself became a theater for this escalating struggle. Planets under Imperial rule experienced both fear and subjugation, while hidden outposts became sanctuaries for those seeking to resist. Vader moved through this landscape with the precision of a predator, striking when opportunity arose and disappearing before opposition could react. Even the faintest whisper of his presence could disrupt plans, force evacuations, and induce hesitation among rebel forces, demonstrating the terrifying breadth of his reach. As the rebellion's influence spread, Vader increasingly engaged in strategic manipulation of entire systems. He leveraged political structures, controlled governors, and orchestrated local power dynamics to prevent uprisings before they emerged. Systems that might have served as strongholds for the rebellion were pacified, neutralized, or co-opted, creating an environment where resistance required extreme caution and ingenuity. The combination of force, intelligence, and manipulation ensured that the Empire's authority remained dominant, even as the rebellion gained strength. Vader's personal encounters with the rebellion grew more frequent and intense. He faced individuals whose leadership, courage, and tactical skill challenged his perceptions and forced him to reconsider assumptions about both enemies and the Force. These interactions were never simple. They involved physical combat, psychological maneuvering, and the subtle application of the dark side, all woven into a complex tapestry of fear, anticipation, and strategy. Even as the rebellion expanded, Vader's control of perception and narrative magnified his power. Rumors, misinformation, and orchestrated appearances ensured that the galaxy viewed him not just as a Sith Lord, but as an omnipresent force capable of anticipating any act of defiance. Fear became both a tool and a weapon, shaping decisions across entire star systems and ensuring that even small victories by rebels carried significant risk. The interplay between the rebellion and Vader reached its most critical phase in this period. Rebel operations became bolder, requiring greater coordination and intelligence, while Vader's countermeasures became more precise, psychological, and lethal. Each encounter refined both sides, sharpening tactics, testing resolve, and creating an intricate, multi-layered struggle that spanned both space and the psyche. Vader's reputation as both hunter and strategist became legendary. Stories of his presence, of entire cells being neutralized before realizing they were compromised, spread across star systems, reinforcing the psychological dominance that complemented his physical power. This reputation was a key element of his strategy, ensuring that the rebellion's leaders understood the constant peril of discovery and the immense skill required to survive against him. And yet, amid this dominance, the rebellion endured. Hidden bases, covert communication networks, and the unyielding determination of leaders and operatives allowed hope to persist, flickering like a distant star against the shadow of the Empire. Vader's awareness of this persistence informed his actions, his tactics, and his understanding of both the Force and human resilience. The galaxy became a living chessboard, with every move, counter-move, and hidden maneuver shaped by the interplay between fear, hope, and the relentless presence of Darth Vader. Every engagement, every intelligence operation, and every confrontation further solidified his mastery. The rebellion forced him to adapt, to refine, and to apply the lessons of both strategy and human behavior to an ever-evolving threat. Even as their numbers grew and their operations became more daring, Vader remained several steps ahead, combining the full breadth of his abilities to ensure that resistance could never escape his shadow. The galaxy, in this turning tide, was suspended between domination and hope. Vader's campaigns shaped not only physical outcomes but the psychological and strategic landscape, defining what survival, courage, and resistance meant under the most formidable power the galaxy had ever seen. In this tension, the seeds of the ultimate confrontation between the dark side and the enduring spark of rebellion were sown, setting the stage for the climactic events that would define the fate of entire star systems. The culmination of Darth Vader's long campaign against the rebellion, the galaxy's subtle resistance, and the fragile pockets of hope that persisted even under the shadow of the Empire, brought him to the precipice of ultimate confrontation. By this point, the rebellion had grown into a force capable of challenging the Empire on multiple fronts, coordinating across star systems and inspiring citizens to defy oppression in ways that no single military force could easily suppress. Vader's awareness of this escalation was acute, and his methods became both more precise and more ruthless, incorporating decades of strategic mastery, force-enhanced intuition, and an understanding of human behavior refined through countless campaigns. The personal dimension of his struggle grew more pronounced as well. Memories of Padme Amidala, once suppressed beneath layers of fear and rage, surfaced intermittently, shaping his thoughts, his judgments, and even his approach to key encounters. The fleeting visions of what might have been a galaxy where he remained Anakin Skywalker, a husband, a Jedi, a protector, haunted him, lurking beneath the mask and armor in ways he could neither fully embrace nor entirely suppress. These remnants of humanity, faint as they were, influenced his actions subtly, affecting the timing of strikes, the assessment of opponents, and his occasional restraint in moments where sheer power could have obliterated opposition entirely. As the rebellion became increasingly daring, Darth Vader's confrontations with key figures intensified. He faced pilots whose daring raids threatened critical Imperial installations, leaders whose strategic insight allowed them to outmaneuver forces far superior in strength, and spies whose infiltration imperiled even the most secure operations. Each of these encounters became a test of his ability to predict, manipulate, and dominate, yet also a study in the human qualities that his training as a Sith and his history as a Jedi could never entirely extinguish. The psychological dimension of warfare reached its peak during this period. Vader understood that fear alone was insufficient. Hope, belief, and loyalty could counteract the influence of the dark side in subtle but significant ways. He observed the dedication of rebel leaders, the resilience of small cells, and the inspiration that even a single heroic act could provide across multiple systems. This awareness did not weaken him, it honed his approach, forcing him to account for human emotion, unpredictability, and ingenuity in a way that pure brute force never could. Major confrontations began to shape the trajectory of galactic history. The battles over resource hubs, strategic planets, and fleet movements demanded the full extent of Vader's strategic and force capabilities. He deployed squadrons with surgical precision, guided troops with the insight of one who could anticipate enemy movements, and utilized the Force not only to overpower but to control the battlefield in ways that seemed almost supernatural. Every maneuver was deliberate, every decision weighed with decades of accumulated knowledge, and every engagement reinforced the aura of inevitability that surrounded him. The climactic confrontations, however, introduced variables that even Darth Vader could not fully predict. Key figures in the rebellion, individuals whose skills, determination, and latent force sensitivity mirrored aspects of Anakin's own past, challenged him in ways that tested not only his strategic genius, but the very foundations of his identity. Pilots executed near-impossible raids, intelligence operatives uncovered and circumvented Imperial protocols, and leaders inspired coordinated strikes that, while never fully victorious, forced Vader to respond with ingenuity and adaptability at a level beyond conventional tactics. These encounters reveal the duality at the core of Darth Vader. The enforcer of the Emperor's will confronted not just enemies in the field but echoes of himself, reminders of the man who had once sought to protect, to fight for justice, and to wield power responsibly. Each confrontation was therefore simultaneously a strategic exercise, a moral reckoning, and a psychological duel, blending fear, hope, and insight into a tapestry that shaped the outcome of the galaxy's most critical conflicts. The destruction of key rebel bases, while tactical victories, also illustrated the limits of pure power. Rebel leadership proved resilient, relocating operations, inspiring new recruits, and maintaining communication networks that even Vader's extensive intelligence could not fully disrupt. These persistent sparks of resistance demonstrated that even a Sith Lord of unparalleled skill, strength, and insight could not fully control the currents of human will, determination, and belief. Vader adapted, combining the relentless pursuit of force with a deepening understanding of the subtleties of rebellion, learning that patience, timing, and manipulation were as essential as raw might. The personal dimension of this final period cannot be overstated. In rare moments of reflection, Vader considered what the galaxy could have been under different choices, different paths, and different outcomes. He weighed the consequences of every decision, from the enforcement of Imperial doctrine to the subtle restraint in certain encounters, and he recognized that every action, every maneuver, reverberated far beyond immediate results. Even as the galaxy feared him, even as rebellion persisted, and even as the Emperor's shadow loomed, Vader's inner awareness of his own humanity remained a faint but persistent undercurrent shaping his legacy. As the rebellion grew, so too did Vader's notoriety. Stories of entire rebel cells being neutralized before they realized they were compromised spread like wildfire across the galaxy. Legends of his power, insight, and seeming omnipresence inspired both terror and caution, amplifying his ability to influence outcomes without direct action. Planets fell silent, systems deferred, and even neutral parties took measures to avoid attracting his attention, demonstrating the profound psychological reach of a single Sith Lord. The climactic events also forced Vader to confront the fragility of his own existence. He had survived countless battles, near-death experiences, and internal conflicts, yet the accumulation of wounds, both physical and spiritual, reminded him of mortality even as he wielded unparalleled power. This awareness deepened the intensity with which he approached every engagement, every strategic decision, and every confrontation with the ever-growing rebellion, blending caution with ruthlessness in equal measure. Ultimately, the legacy of Darth Vader was defined by the interplay of absolute power and the enduring complexity of the human spirit. He dominated fleets, crushed insurgencies, and manipulated the galaxy's political and psychological landscape with an authority few could rival. Yet within this domination existed the traces of the man he once was, Anakin Skywalker, the Jedi, the husband, the friend, whose choices, regrets, and memories shaped every shadow beneath the mask. Even as the galaxy trembled under his presence, the faint echo of humanity persisted, influencing actions, tempering decisions, and adding depth to his fearsome reputation. The final confrontations before the decisive moments of galactic history solidified this duality. Vader's battles were not merely physical, they were psychological, moral, and strategic, encompassing the full spectrum of skill, intuition, and foresight that he had developed over decades. Every engagement reflected the complex interweaving of fear and hope, power and morality, darkness and the lingering, almost imperceptible light of a man who had become legend. And so, as the galaxy edged toward the moments that would define its fate, Darth Vader's legacy was complete in every sense, a master of the dark side, a strategist without equal, and a figure whose presence shaped systems, civilizations, and hearts. He stood at the pinnacle of fear, authority, and enduring myth. Yet beneath the mask, beneath the armor, the faint heartbeat of Anakin Skywalker persisted, a reminder that even in the deepest darkness, the past, memory, and human complexity endure. The galaxy would remember Darth Vader not only as an enforcer of terror, but as a symbol of the intricate balance between power and humanity, domination and vulnerability, fear and the unextinguished spark of hope. Through these final confrontations, through every victory and every adaptation, through the subtle interplay of strategy, insight, and the enduring influence of memory, the story of Darth Vader reached its full, terrifying, and awe-inspiring culmination. The galaxy, forever shaped by his actions, learned that power without understanding is incomplete, that fear can control but cannot fully extinguish, and that the shadow of a single being can echo across star systems, civilizations, and generations. And in this way, the narrative of Darth Vader, the man who had once been Anakin Skywalker, became a timeless story of dominance, conflict, strategy, and the enduring complexity of the human spirit, intertwined with the unrelenting power of the dark side.